Welcome to MINDSHOCK. This is your host, Bruce McGuire. Today we're going to take a look at artificial intelligence capabilities in assisting to solve cold cases. This is, of course, Bruce McGuire, your not-so-humble host. And we will be looking at all these different factors and just how much AI can help the realm of unsolved cold cases. As always, if you find the podcast interesting and informative, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Help support the MINDSHOCK podcast. Help logic and reason return to a world where it is quickly becoming extinct and keep up awareness in all of these cases. You could also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Help support the channel that way. Make sure you subscribe, like, and share. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast requests. You could also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. Okay. So I actually already put out the Jean-Benet Ramsey AI analysis earlier. I probably should have done this episode first, just as an introduction into what AI can and cannot do and the usefulness of it. So the main point here is that AI, of course, is just not going to spit out an answer of who did it on an unsolved case. So AI's greatest strength is also its greatest weakness, because the main capability of AI is the memory. It can keep track of literally all known information simultaneously and assess as necessary. Now, that's also a flaw, because when you're examining one particular theory or one angle or one suspect, it's difficult to get it to throw out all other information, all the knowledge it has of all other cases, the way that cases are prosecuted in court, the way evidence is presented, just the statistics of all of the solved cases, how courts came to decisions, just the process of everything. To get it to throw away all that data, you can try. So basically, what the MINDSHOCK AI model is, I used a bunch of different AI software systems, because there's really no single AI that I think works extremely well, because they all have their flaws. So I kind of used a combination of a bunch of them and then tweaked it myself to try to get it to account for certain variables. Now, I'm not an expert programmer or anything, so I really don't know how to fix the issue of AI factoring unknown variables into everything, because it's almost against its own nature, because it has all of the info. It's giving you information based on all of the info, keeping all of the known variables in mind. But weighing unknown variables, which is obviously critical in true crime cases, or when the answers are unknown, or when you're dealing with an outlier case, because, again, the greatest strength of AI is its greatest weakness. AI can keep in mind all of these countless cases. For example, young children, if they're killed, they're usually killed by a family member. So it's hard to get it to throw that completely away. Now, I do try to give certain prompts in order to get AI to disregard. Like if we're examining one single theory, I do try to get it to throw away everything else and only examine the variables within one theory. It's okay. I mean, there's definitely an improvement in statistical analysis and probabilities when I do that, but it seems like it's just about impossible with the current AI software out there to get it to completely disregard the unknowns and get it to completely disregard all court procedure in terms of getting prosecution and all that. So to kind of try to divorce all of that from just pure pursuit of truth on statistical analysis and likelihoods and probabilities and all of that, and for it to spit out percentages, it's kind of difficult. But here's where I think it is extremely useful, because just based on all the probabilities of all other cases, that is valuable information. Just like there's a reason the boyfriend, the ex-boyfriend, the husband, the ex-husband, someone known to a female that has met with foul play, there's a reason the investigation usually starts there. And that's a pretty smart allocation of resources, unless there's damning other evidence. But if there's really not a lot of evidence, that's where you start for a reason, because on a balance of probabilities, it's usually them. Now, it might not be them in that particular case, but to ignore that balance of probabilities that wouldn't be smart, logical, or efficient in any way. So this strength of AI can get us to kind of zero in to the more probable areas based on all known info. Now, of course, again, the AI is not weighing the unknowns well. And I'm sure given the quick evolution of AI, it'll get there more and more, just like, the general progress of AI. But here's where it's the most valuable. In theories and suspects, it's not necessarily the percentage it's giving, but the difference in percentage. Like, again, going back to the Jean Benet analysis, if you haven't seen that, check that out. It's not necessarily about the exact number of percent, but look at the difference in percentages that the AI gives versus, let's say, a family member, versus John Mark Carr, versus some of these lesser known suspects, housekeepers, Access Graphics business associates of John Ramsey. Now, again, to get the AI to disregard all of the stats from all cases, that's a little bit tricky. I'm still working on it. I think I could tweak it even better than it did in the John Benet Ramsey case. But yeah, we got all the major cases coming up. I will be doing the AI run through on all of them. And just to clarify, I do get the percentages first, but I like the AI to kind of almost show its work. So I ask it to explain how it got there, which variables were used, and then tweak from there as necessary to kind of focus on certain theories, and then also get it to really examine only variables per one theory at a time. For example, if O.J. Simpson is innocent, what are the other variables? What are the statistical likelihoods and probabilities of all these other variables if he's innocent? So the AI is operating under that pretense, so it can kind of disregard certain aspects. And then if he's guilty, let's say he's guilty for sure, what are the probabilities, variables, analysis on whether or not he had an accomplice, who it is, what the differences between possible accomplices could be, and the percentages. So the AI needs to show its work so we can get a good understanding of how it works, and then the tweaking can come from there to get it more and more precise. So that's really the process. I mean, that's all I wanted to go over. This is just an introduction into AI and how it will be utilized in other cases. I'm also running a few different test models on analyzing conspiracies in the paranormal as well. That's a lot more difficult because a lot of that deals in largely the unknown area. So to get the AI to work within that while ignoring other information, I mean, that's all in process. And as AI evolves and becomes more and more capable, I think it'll be getting there. So this is all a journey and a process, and obviously mind-shocking to say the least. When the MindShock podcast first started, I did not think we would actually be using AI models to assist in all of these investigations and analyses, but it is obviously a very, very good tool. Still some weaknesses that are being worked out, but yeah, it should be very, very interesting, and everybody out there can chime in on their thoughts and, of course, requests for AI analysis in all of these cases. So that's it for now, and check them out. I'll be doing a lot of them, all the cases MindShock has covered thus far, and then, of course, a bunch of cases not yet covered will also be analyzed with AI. So that's it for now. Catch you guys next time. This is Bruce McGuire signing out.
JonBenet Ramsey. The murder of JonBenet Ramsey remains unsolved. The 6-year-old beauty queen was found dead in her family's home in Boulder, Colorado, on December 26, 1996. Throughout the years, there have been many theories about who committed the crime, but no one has been definitively proven to be the perpetrator. The family, including parents Patsy and John Ramsey, and JonBenét's older brother Burke, have been subjects of suspicion but were officially cleared by DNA evidence in 2008. No one person has been definitively identified as the most likely suspect in the murder of JonBené Ramsey, which remains an open case. There have been many theories and suspects throughout the years, but none have been conclusively proven to be the murderer. The Boulder Police Department and the District Attorney's Office have different perspectives on the case, which further complicates the issue. The intruder theory. This theory posits that an unknown intruder broke into the Ramsey house and killed JonBené. Supporters of this theory point to a broken basement window, a footprint in the basement, unknown DNA found on JonBenét's clothing, and the complicated ransom note as evidence of an intruder. The DNA found at the scene did not match any members of the Ramsey family, which led the Boulder District Attorney's Office to officially clear the Ramsey family of involvement in 2008. The family member theory. Early in the investigation, the Boulder Police Department focused on members of the Ramsey family as suspects. This included parents John and Patsy Ramsey, as well as JonBenét's older brother, Burke Ramsey. Factors leading to this suspicion included the lack of forced entry, the strange ransom note that was written with a pen and paper from the house, and the fact that JonBené was found in a rarely used room in the basement. However, as mentioned above, the Ramsey family was officially cleared in 2008 due to DNA evidence. Other theories. Other theories suggest that a friend or associate of the Ramsey family might be responsible. Some point to individuals in the pageant circuit or other people who had access to the home. However, no substantial evidence has definitively linked anyone to the crime. In conclusion, while there are multiple theories about who might have been responsible for JonBenét's murder, as of my last update in September 2021, no suspect has been definitively identified based on the available evidence. The case remains one of the most notorious unsolved murder cases in American history. For the most current information, please check the latest sources. Determining which theory is statistically most likely in the case of JonBené Ramsey's murder is challenging. Without specific evidence pointing to a definitive suspect or motive, it is difficult to assign probabilities or use statistics to determine likelihood. However, it's worth noting that statistically, in cases of child homicide, family members or caregivers are often involved. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, in cases of child homicides, parents are the perpetrators approximately 56% of the time. That being said, this statistical trend does not constitute evidence in the JonBené Ramsey case, nor does it prove guilt. Each case is unique and must be evaluated on its own merits and evidence. In the Ramsey case, the family was cleared by DNA evidence in 2008, though some investigators and members of the public have questioned this decision. The intruder theory, which posits that an unknown individual broke into the house and killed JonBené, cannot be ruled out either, especially considering the unidentified male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing. Was there a police cover-up? The JonBené Ramsey case is one of the most high-profile unsolved murder cases in American history, and it's been subject to many criticisms, theories, and conjectures over the years. Some of these revolve around alleged mishandling of the case by the Boulder Police Department, leading to speculations of a potential cover-up. However, it's crucial to distinguish between perceived procedural mistakes and a deliberate cover-up. Here's what we know. Criticisms of the Boulder Police Department's handling of the case. 1. Contamination of the crime scene. On the day JonBené was found, many people were allowed to move freely throughout the house, potentially contaminating the crime scene and jeopardizing evidence. For instance, John Ramsey was allowed to search the house, and he ultimately found JonBené's body in the basement. 2. Delayed collection of evidence. Certain critical pieces of evidence were not collected immediately. Notably, the alleged ransom note wasn't initially taken into evidence, which could have potentially led to degradation or contamination of fingerprints or other trace evidence. 3. Public statements. Some critics argue that the Boulder Police Department was too quick to focus on the parents as suspects, potentially ignoring other leads. Their public statements at times seem to imply the Ramseys' guilt, further fueling this perception. However, these points do not necessarily indicate a cover-up. They could just as easily be attributed to procedural errors, lack of resources, or lack of experience in handling such a high-profile and complex murder case. Points against a deliberate cover-up. 1. Extensive investigation. Over the years, the Boulder Police Department and other investigative bodies have interviewed hundreds of people, collected extensive physical evidence, and followed countless leads. This level of exhaustive inquiry suggests a genuine effort to solve the crime rather than cover it up. 2. Outside involvement. The case was not solely in the hands of the Boulder Police Department. The FBI, Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and later a grand jury were involved. The more agencies involved, the less likely a cover-up becomes. 3. Public scrutiny. The high-profile nature of the case and the significant public and media scrutiny it received would make a cover-up challenging to execute. 4. DNA evidence. In 2008, new DNA testing methods led to the exoneration of the Ramsey family by the Boulder District Attorney's Office. This shows the department's willingness to follow the evidence even when it led away from their initial suspects. Did JonBenet die earlier in the evening? The theory that JonBenet Ramsey might have died earlier in the evening at a Christmas party and that the Ramseys subsequently covered it up is one of many speculative theories that have been put forward over the years. However, this theory, like many others, is not backed by concrete evidence. Let's delve into the reasons for and against this theory. Reasons for: 1. Time of death uncertainty. Determining an exact time of death is notoriously difficult in forensic science, especially after a body has been moved or disturbed. This inherent uncertainty has left room for speculation about when exactly JonBenet died. 2. The ransom note. Some find the ransom note found at the scene suspicious given its length and the fact that it was reportedly written on paper from inside the Ramsey house. This has led some to theorize that it was part of a staged scene to cover up the true circumstances of JonBenet's death. Reasons against: 1. Absence of witnesses. The theory that JonBenet died at a Christmas party would require many individuals to either not notice or actively cover up her death. This seems unlikely given the number of people who would have been present at such a party. No witnesses have come forward to support this theory. 2. Forensic evidence. The autopsy report suggests that JonBenet was killed by strangulation and a skull fracture. There was also evidence of sexual assault. If JonBenet had died accidentally at a party, it wouldn't explain these violent injuries. 3. Alibi. There were many people at the Christmas party with the Ramseys who have vouched for their presence and normal behavior throughout the event. 4. Behavior of the parents. After JonBenet's death, the Ramseys actively sought to find the killer, hiring private investigators and offering rewards for information. This behavior is not typically consistent with parents seeking to cover up their child's death. 5. DNA evidence. Unidentified male DNA was found at the crime scene, which doesn't align with the theory of an accidental death at a party followed by a cover-up. In conclusion, while it's technically possible to construct a narrative in which JonBenet died earlier at a Christmas party and her death was subsequently covered up by the Ramseys, there is little concrete evidence to support this theory. The suspects. Over the years, many individuals have been considered suspects in the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. However, it's important to note that none have been definitively proven to be the perpetrator, and the case remains unsolved. Here are some of the more notable individuals who have come under suspicion. John Ramsey. JonBenét's father was one of the initial suspects. The theory was that he accidentally killed JonBenét and then staged the crime scene to cover it up. However, he was officially cleared by DNA evidence in 2008. John Ramsey, JonBenét's father, has been a figure of suspicion due to several factors. 1. Discovery of the body. John was the one who found JonBenét's body in the basement of their home several hours after the police arrived. Some questioned why he and a family friend were allowed to search the home, potentially contaminating the crime scene. His immediate removal of the duct tape from JonBenét's mouth and carrying her body upstairs also disrupted the crime scene, leading some to speculate he was trying to obscure evidence. 2. Ransom note. The ransom note demanded $118,000, which was almost the exact amount of John's bonus that year. This led some to suspect that John wrote the note himself or was somehow involved. 3. Behavior. Some have critiqued John's calm demeanor during the initial investigation and media interviews as being suspicious. However, it's important to note that people react to stress and grief differently, and such observations are largely subjective. 4. Flight plans. The family's initial plans to fly to Michigan the morning after JonBenét's death led some to question if John was attempting to flee the scene. However, it's worth noting that this was a pre-scheduled flight for a family vacation, not something arranged after JonBenét's death. Despite these points, there's no definitive evidence that John Ramsey was involved in his daughter's murder. DNA evidence found at the scene, which belonged to an unknown male, led to John, along with the rest of his immediate family, being officially cleared by the Boulder District Attorney's Office in 2008. Additionally, many of the suspicions around John Ramsey are based on circumstantial evidence, subjective interpretations of his behavior, or speculation, rather than concrete forensic evidence. Like the rest of his family, John Ramsey has always maintained his innocence. Patsy Ramsey, JonBenét's mother, was also an initial suspect, primarily because of the ransom note. Some handwriting experts stated that there were similarities between her handwriting and that on the note. However, like her husband, Patsy was officially cleared by DNA evidence in 2008. Patsy Ramsey, JonBenét's mother, has been the subject of speculation due to several factors. 1. The ransom note. Perhaps the most significant piece of evidence involving Patsy is the ransom note found in the house. The note was written on a pad of paper from the Ramsey home with a pen found at the scene. Handwriting experts were unable to definitively exclude Patsy as the author of the note, though none could positively identify her handwriting either. Some critics believe that the length and content of the note suggest that it was staged. 2. Initial 911 call. Patsy's behavior during the initial 911 call has been analyzed, with some claiming she seemed overly dramatic or that she did not hang up the phone properly, potentially leading to an overheard conversation. These interpretations are largely subjective and not definitive proof of guilt or innocence. 3. Bed wedding theory. One theory suggests that Patsy, frustrated with JonBenét's chronic bed wedding, struck her daughter in a fit of rage, inflicting the fatal head injury. Then the theory suggests she staged the crime scene to cover up her actions. However, this theory is purely speculative and not based on concrete evidence. 4. Patsy's interviews and public appearances. Some observers pointed to Patsy's controlled demeanor during interviews and press conferences as suspicious. However, reactions to trauma can vary widely, and such observations are largely subjective. 5. Patsy's cancer. Patsy was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer in 1993, 3 years before JonBenét's murder. Some have speculated that her health crisis may have contributed to stress or mental instability. leading her to harm JonBenet, though this is entirely speculative and not based on any concrete evidence. Despite these points, it's important to note that there's no conclusive evidence that Patsy Ramsey was involved in her daughter's murder. In 2008, Patsy, along with the rest of her immediate family, was officially cleared by the Boulder District Attorney's Office due to DNA evidence found at the scene, which belonged to an unknown male. Patsy Ramsey died in 2006, maintaining her innocence until the end. Burke Ramsey. JonBenet's older brother was only 9 years old at the time of her death. Some have speculated that he accidentally killed JonBenet during a fight and that his parents covered up the crime to protect him. Burke was officially cleared by DNA evidence in 2008, and he has consistently maintained his innocence. Burke Ramsey, JonBenet's older brother, was initially not publicly considered a suspect by the Boulder Police Department because he was only 9 years old at the time of JonBenet's death. However, he came under public scrutiny years later, particularly after a 2016 CBS documentary, The Case of JonBenet Ramsey, in which a team of investigators suggested that Burke may have accidentally killed JonBenet and the parents staged the murder scene to protect him. The theory is based on several factors. Interview behavior. Some behavior analysts suggested that Burke's demeanor in police interviews shortly after the murder was unusual, including his lack of emotional affect and apparent lack of awareness of the gravity of the situation. It is important to note, however, that behavior in interviews can be influenced by many factors and does not provide definitive evidence of guilt or innocence. Pineapple evidence. A bowl of pineapple was found on the kitchen table, and autopsy reports indicated that JonBenet had eaten pineapple shortly before her death. Burke's fingerprints were found on the bowl. This was seen as significant because the parents had initially stated that JonBenet was asleep when they returned home and she didn't eat anything. The flashlight. A flashlight found in the kitchen was identified as a possible murder weapon because it could have caused JonBenet's head injuries. Some believe that Burke could have hit JonBenet with the flashlight, perhaps in anger or as part of a sibling squabble, not intending serious harm. Later interviews. Some pointed to Burke's behavior in later interviews, such as his 2016 interview with Dr. Phil, as evidence, noting his smiling demeanor when discussing his sister's death. Again, it's crucial to remember that reactions to trauma can vary widely, and someone's demeanor in an interview isn't conclusive proof of guilt or innocence. Despite these points, there's no concrete evidence to definitively implicate Burke in his sister's death. The DNA found at the scene did not match any members of the Ramsey family, and Burke, like his parents, was officially cleared by the Boulder District Attorney's Office in 2008. Furthermore, both Burke and his parents have consistently maintained that Burke had nothing to do with JonBenet's death. In 2016, Burke filed a defamation lawsuit against CBS and the experts featured in the documentary for suggesting that he killed his sister, which was settled in 2019. John Andrew Ramsey is the half-brother of JonBenet Ramsey and the son of John Ramsey from his first marriage. He, like all family members, came under initial scrutiny in the aftermath of JonBenet's murder due to the nature of the crime and the lack of evidence of a break-in at the Ramsey home. Here's what we know about his connection to the case. Reasons for suspicion. 1. Familial relationship. As a member of the Ramsey family, John Andrew was initially part of the circle of individuals who were investigated in relation to the murder. Evidence against his involvement. 1. Alibi. John Andrew Ramsey was reportedly out of state when the murder occurred. He was in Atlanta, Georgia, with his sister Melinda. 2. DNA mismatch. The DNA found at the scene of the crime, a sample of male DNA, did not match that of John Andrew Ramsey. This DNA evidence led the Boulder District Attorney to publicly exonerate the Ramsey family in 2008. Based on the available information, it seems highly unlikely that John Andrew Ramsey was involved in the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. His strong alibi and the DNA evidence make his involvement improbable. Bill McReynolds. McReynolds, a family friend who had played Santa Claus at a holiday party at the Ramsey home, was considered a suspect because of his familiarity with the family. Over the years, many theories have been proposed to explain the tragic murder of JonBenet Ramsey, ranging from the plausible to the outlandish. One of the more unusual theories involves a Santa Claus impersonator. Bill McReynolds, who played Santa Claus at a holiday party at the Ramsey home 2 days before JonBenet's death, came under suspicion due to his familiarity with the family and because his own daughter had been kidnapped 22 years prior to JonBenet's death. On the same date, December 26th, McReynolds also reportedly gave JonBenet a card that said, "You will receive a special gift after Christmas." Furthermore, McReynolds' wife wrote a play about a child getting molested and then murdered in a basement. However, no physical evidence linked McReynolds to the crime scene, and his DNA did not match the unidentified male DNA found on JonBenet's clothing. Additionally, the Boulder Police Department did not consider him a serious suspect in the case. Gary Oliva. Oliva, a registered sex offender, was living in Boulder at the time of JonBenet's death. He was considered a suspect because of his criminal history and because he allegedly confessed to a friend that he had hurt a little girl. However, his DNA did not match the unidentified male DNA found at the crime scene. Ari Oliva is a registered sex offender who was living in Boulder, Colorado at the time of JonBenet Ramsey's murder, and he has come under public scrutiny several times in connection with the case. Here are the key points. 1. Criminal history. Oliva's criminal history and his presence in the Boulder area at the time of the murder have caused some to view him as a potential suspect. His previous offenses included crimes against minors. 2. Alleged confessions. Oliva has reportedly made several confessions to killing JonBenet over the years. In one instance, he allegedly told a high school friend that he had hurt a little girl in Boulder. In another, he reportedly made a confession to a counselor. 3. Obsession with JonBenet. Oliva has demonstrated an apparent obsession with JonBenet, which he has expressed in letters to a friend. In 2000, when he was arrested on unrelated charges, police found a photo of JonBenet in his backpack. 4. Inconsistent statements. Oliva has made inconsistent statements about his involvement in the murder. In some instances, he has seemingly confessed, while in others, he has denied involvement. Despite these points, there's no definitive evidence that Gary Oliva was involved in JonBenet's murder. Most significantly, his DNA does not match the unidentified male DNA found at the scene. Furthermore, while his alleged confessions and obsession with JonBenet are disturbing, they do not provide concrete evidence of his involvement in the crime. As with other suspects in this case, many of the suspicions around Gary Oliva are based on circumstantial evidence, his criminal history, and his own inconsistent statements, rather than concrete forensic evidence. John Mark Carr. Carr confessed to the crime in 2006, but his confession was widely regarded as a fabrication because he was unable to provide details of the crime that weren't publicly available. His DNA also did not match the crime scene sample, and there was no evidence to place him in Boulder at the time of the murder. John Mark Carr, a former schoolteacher, made international headlines in 2006 when he falsely confessed to killing JonBenet Ramsey. However, the evidence overwhelmingly suggests that Carr was not involved in JonBenet's murder. 1. False confession. Carr's confession, made while he was living in Thailand, was elaborate and detailed. He claimed that he had drugged and sexually assaulted JonBenet, then accidentally killed her. However, his confession was inconsistent with the evidence. The autopsy found no drugs in JonBenet's system, and the nature of her injuries did not match Carr's account. 2. No physical evidence. There was no physical evidence linking Carr to the crime scene. His DNA did not match the unidentified male DNA found on JonBenet's clothing. 3. Alibi. Family members insisted that Carr was in Georgia, not Colorado, at the time of the murder, providing him with an alibi. Although this alibi was not definitively confirmed, it cast further doubt on his confession. 4. Obsession with the case. Carr had a known obsession with the JonBenet Ramsey case, as well as with the case of Polly Klaas, a child who was abducted and murdered in California in 1993. His detailed knowledge of the case likely came from his extensive research rather than personal involvement. 5. Behavior and statements. Carr's behavior and statements after his arrest further undermined his credibility. He seemed to enjoy the attention he was receiving, and his descriptions of his relationship with JonBenet were fantastical and implausible. After his arrest, Carr was extradited to the United States, but the Boulder County District Attorney's Office quickly dropped the case against him due to the lack of evidence. Carr's false confession is considered a notorious example of the challenges involved in high-profile criminal investigations, particularly the difficulty of separating fact from fiction. Michael Helgoth. Helgoth's death shortly after JonBenet's murder led some to suspect him. His property was searched, but no evidence linking him to the crime was found. Michael Helgoth was a local Boulder resident who came to public attention in connection with JonBenet Ramsey's murder due to several circumstantial factors. 1. Death. Helgoth died by suicide in February 1997, just a few months after JonBenet's murder. His death in close proximity to the crime aroused suspicions. 2. Boots. A pair of high-tech brand boots owned by Helgoth allegedly matched a footprint found at the Ramsey crime scene. 3. Taser. A stun gun was reportedly found among Helgoth's belongings after his death. Some investigators believe a stun gun was used in JonBenet's murder due to marks found on her body, though this is dispute. 4. Suspected burglaries. Helgoth was reportedly involved in car salvaging and was suspected of being involved in local burglaries, contributing to a profile of potential criminal behavior. Despite these points, there's no definitive evidence linking Helgoth to JonBenet's murder. 1. DNA. Crucially, Helgoth's DNA did not match the unidentified male DNA found at the crime scene. 2. Alibi. Reports suggest that Helgoth had an alibi for the night of the murder. According to a friend, they were together until early morning hours on December 26, 1996, which would likely exclude him as a suspect. Like many individuals associated with the case, Helgoth's connection is largely based on circumstantial evidence and speculation, rather than concrete forensic evidence. Chris Wolf. Wolf, a local journalist, was considered a suspect by the Ramseys because of his alleged erratic behavior. He sued the Ramseys for defamation, and the suit was settled out of court. No evidence links him to the crime. Chris Wolf, a local journalist in Boulder at the time of JonBenet Ramsey's murder, was another person of interest in the case. Here are the key points. 1. His girlfriend's statement. Wolf's then-girlfriend reportedly told police that he had disappeared for several hours on the night of JonBenet's murder, and that he had arrived home dressed in all black. She also said that she found a pair of black boots in his possession that matched a footprint found at the crime scene. 2. Interest in the case. Wolf showed a particular interest in the case and was critical of the Ramseys and the police handling of the investigation. This in itself is not incriminating, as he was a journalist, but it did bring him to the attention of investigators. 3. Legal action. Wolf eventually sued the Ramseys for defamation after being named as a suspect in a book written by John and Patsy Ramsey. However, as with other suspects in this case, there's no definitive evidence that Wolf was involved in JonBenét's murder. 1. DNA. Wolf's DNA does not match the unidentified male DNA found at the crime scene. 2. No physical evidence. Apart from the footprint, which was never definitively linked to Wolf, there was no physical evidence tying him to the crime scene. Linda Hoffman, Pew. The Ramsey family's housekeeper was considered a suspect because of her access to the home. However, she cooperated with the police and no evidence has been found to link her to the crime. Linda Hoffman, Pew, was the Ramsey family's housekeeper and was considered a person of interest early in the investigation. Here are the key points. 1. Access and knowledge. As the housekeeper, Linda had access to the Ramsey home and was familiar with its layout. She also knew where to find pen and paper in the house. The ransom note was written with a pen, and on paper from the Ramseys' home, Linda also knew about John Ramsey's $118,000 bonus, the same amount demanded in the ransom note. 2. Financial difficulties. It was reported that Linda and her husband had financial troubles, and she had once asked Patsy Ramsey for a loan of several $1,000s. This led to speculation that she may have had a financial motive for a kidnapping plot. 3. Police interviews. During her interviews with the police, Linda shared her suspicions about the Ramsey family's involvement in the crime, particularly pointing towards Patsy Ramsey. Her interviews, while not implicating her, drew attention to her knowledge of the family and the household. However, there's no definitive evidence linking Linda Hoffman, Pew, to JonBenét's murder. 1. DNA. The unknown male DNA found at the crime scene did not match Linda's DNA. 2. Polygraph test. Linda reportedly passed a polygraph test, lie detector test, during the investigation which, while not foolproof, suggested she was not knowingly lying about her involvement. 3. Cooperation with investigation. Linda cooperated fully with the police investigation and publicly maintained her innocence. Robert Christian Wolf. He was named by John and Patsy Ramsey in their book as a potential suspect due to his alleged presence in Boulder, Colorado, and his criminal record. He sued the Ramseys for defamation, but the case was dismissed. Robert Christian Wolf, not to be confused with local journalist Chris Wolf, was considered a person of interest due to a series of coincidences and circumstantial evidence. Here are the key points. 1. Presence in Boulder. Wolf was in Boulder at the time of the murder and was known to be living a transient lifestyle. This in itself is not incriminating, but it did bring him to the attention of investigators. 2. Legal action. Wolf was named as a potential suspect in a book written by private investigator Ollie Gray, who was hired by the Ramsey family to investigate the case. Wolf eventually sued the Ramseys and Gray for defamation, a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court before being dismissed. However, as with other persons of interest in this case, there's no definitive evidence linking Robert Christian Wolf to JonBenét's murder. 1. DNA. The unknown male DNA found at the crime scene did not match Wolf's DNA. 2. Lack of physical evidence. There was no physical evidence tying him to the crime scene. Fleet White, a close friend of the Ramsey family at the time of JonBené Ramsey's murder, came under suspicion due to his close proximity to the family and his presence at the crime scene on the morning of JonBenét's disappearance. However, it's important to note that suspicion does not equate to guilt. Let's delve deeper into the reasons for suspicion and the evidence for and against his involvement. Reasons for suspicion. 1. Fleet White was one of the first people John Ramsey called upon discovering the ransom note. He was present at the Ramsey house before the police arrived. 2. Given their close relationship, some speculated he might have had access to the house or knowledge of its layout, which could have facilitated the crime. 3. The complexity of the crime scene led some to believe that the murder was an inside job, implicating those close to the family. Evidence against his involvement. 1. Fleet White was extensively interviewed, and his house was searched by the Boulder Police Department. No evidence was found linking him to the crime. 2. DNA evidence found on JonBenét's clothing did not match Fleet White. 3. The Boulder Police Department and Boulder District Attorney's Office have both publicly cleared Fleet White of any involvement in the case. To date, no credible evidence has been presented that directly implicates Fleet White in the crime. Based on the available evidence and the official statements of law enforcement, it seems unlikely that Fleet White was involved in the murder of JonBené Ramsey. While he was initially a person of interest due to his close proximity to the family, the lack of physical evidence connecting him to the crime, combined with the results of the police investigation, have largely dismissed him as a suspect. Glenn Mayer, a neighbor of the Ramseys, was one of many individuals who came under scrutiny in the aftermath of JonBené Ramsey's tragic murder due to his proximity and the fact that he lived in the basement of a house across the street from the Ramseys. The police did investigate him as part of their exhaustive inquiries, as they did with many associated with the family or living in the vicinity. Here's what we know about his connection to the case. Reasons for suspicion. 1. Proximity. Mir lived just across the street from the Ramsey home. This close proximity raised questions, as the investigators believed that the person responsible had knowledge of the Ramsey home layout. 2. Basement living. Mir lived in the basement of the home he occupied, which drew parallels to the basement setting of JonBenét's murder. Evidence against his involvement. 1. Lack of direct evidence. There's no direct evidence linking Mir to the crime. He was one of many people investigated, and no public evidence has been presented that implicates him. 2. DNA mismatch. The DNA evidence found at the scene did not match Meyer. The unidentified male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing has never been definitively matched to any individual. No specific evidence has been produced that connects Glenn Mayer to the crime. Based on the information available, it seems that Glenn Mayer, like many individuals close to the case, was looked into due to his proximity to the Ramsey family. However, without concrete evidence tying him to the crime, it is not appropriate to infer his involvement. It's crucial to note that suspicion alone does not equate to guilt, and all individuals are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Jeff Merrick, a former employee of Access Graphics, the company where JonBenét's father, John Ramsey, worked, did come under scrutiny in the aftermath of the murder. His relationship with the Ramseys and subsequent termination from Access Graphics made him a person of interest in the investigation. Reasons for suspicion. 1. Prior relationship with the Ramseys. Jeff Merrick was known to have had a personal relationship with the Ramsey family and had worked closely with John Ramsey at Access Graphics. 2. Termination from Access Graphics. Merrick was fired from his job, which led to him filing a lawsuit against John Ramsey and the company. 3. The lawsuit. Following his termination, Merrick reportedly was involved in a protracted dispute with John Ramsey and Access Graphics, which included allegations of unfair dismissal. Evidence against his involvement. 1. Lack of physical evidence. To my knowledge, as of my training cutoff in September 2021, there has been no physical evidence linking Jeff Merrick to the crime scene or the murder itself. 2. Alibi. According to some sources, Merrick was reported to be out of state at the time of JonBenét's murder. There has been no specific evidence presented publicly linking Jeff Merrick directly to the crime. Joe and Betty Barnhill were neighbors of the Ramsey family at the time of JonBenet's murder, and because of their proximity and familiarity with the family, they came under initial scrutiny. It's important to clarify that they were not primary suspects, but were part of the wide circle of individuals who were interviewed and investigated due to their relationship with the Ramsey family. Reasons for suspicion: 1. Proximity. The Barnhills lived across the street from the Ramsey family. The investigators initially considered anyone with access or familiarity to the house as a potential person of interest. 2. Familiarity. The Barnhills were reportedly familiar with the Ramsey family. Joe Barnhill even used to look after JonBenet's dog, Jacques Fox. Evidence against their involvement: 1. Lack of motive and evidence. No motive or specific evidence has been publicly presented that implicates the Barnhills in the crime. 2. Alibi. It's reported that the Barnhills were home together on the night of the murder. 3. DNA mismatch. The unidentified male DNA found at the crime scene did not match the Barnhills. 4. Age and health. At the time of the crime, the Barnhills were elderly and Joe Barnhill was in poor health, making it unlikely they could have committed the crime. Based on the information available, it seems unlikely that the Barnhills were involved in the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. While they were initially part of the broader investigation due to their proximity and relationship with the Ramsey family, the lack of specific evidence connecting them to the crime and their reported alibi make their involvement unlikely. It's important to highlight that a significant number of individuals have been questioned or considered throughout the investigation of this high-profile case. It's also worth noting that for many people who have been mentioned in connection with the case, the information is based on rumor, speculation, or circumstantial evidence. While some individuals have been publicly named in connection to the case, many have not been officially named as suspects or persons of interest by law enforcement. The ransom note found in the JonBenet Ramsey case is a significant piece of evidence that continues to perplex investigators and observers. The note was unusually long for a ransom note, and some of its details seemed peculiar. Here are a few key points that might provide some logical context. 1. Source of the paper and pen. The ransom note was written on paper from a notepad found in the Ramsey house with a pen from the house as well. If an intruder wrote the note, they would have spent a significant amount of time in the house both finding these items and writing the note, which is unusual for a break. 2. Content and length. The note was nearly 3 pages long, which is extremely lengthy compared to typical ransom notes. It also contained a number of odd phrases and references, such as a specific ransom amount that matched John Ramsey's bonus that year and a sign off from a small foreign faction, a phrase that hasn't been associated with any known group. 3. Handwriting analysis. Handwriting analysis did not conclusively identify the author of the note. Patsy Ramsey, JonBenet's mother, was initially said to be a possible match, but no definitive conclusions were drawn. If a family member did write the note, it could suggest an attempt to mislead investigators. 4. Timing of the note's creation. If an intruder wrote the note before the crime, this would imply a level of planning and risk. Taking that seems inconsistent with the chaotic nature of the crime scene. If the note was written after the crime, it's difficult to understand why an intruder would linger at the scene. 5. The note's discovery. The note was discovered on a staircase by Patsy Ramsey, not in JonBenet's room or attached to her in any way. This is also unusual for a ransom situation. In sum, the ransom note raises more questions than it answers. It's one of the many reasons why the JonBenet Ramsey case has remained unsolved for so long. Some interpret the note as evidence of an intruder, while others see it as a potential effort to stage a crime scene. Without more conclusive evidence, its true origins and purpose remain a matter of speculation. the $118,000 ransom demand in the JonBenet Ramsey case is indeed an unusual detail. This exact amount was nearly the same as a bonus that John Ramsey, JonBenet's father, had received that year, which was a public record. This detail has been interpreted in a few different ways. 1. Inside knowledge. If the ransom note writer had knowledge of John Ramsey's exact bonus amount, this could indicate that the person had some sort of inside knowledge or connection to John Ramsey's work. 2. Coincidence. It's also possible that the matching amounts could be a coincidence. If the ransom note was an attempt to mislead investigators or cover up the crime, the person who wrote it might have chosen an amount they believed sounded reasonable without knowing about John Ramsey's bonus. 3. Misdirection. Another possibility is that the person who wrote the note knew about the bonus and intentionally used the same amount to mislead investigators, making it appear as if someone with inside knowledge of Ramsey's finances was involved. As with many aspects of the JonBenet Ramsey case, without more definitive evidence or a confession, it's difficult to know for sure why this specific amount was chosen. The ransom note and the unusual amount demanded continue to be key pieces of evidence in this unsolved case. The official cause of JonBenet Ramsey's death, according to the autopsy report, was asphyxia by strangulation associated with craniocerebral trauma, which means she was strangled and suffered a severe skull fracture. This combination of severe injuries makes it highly unlikely that her death was accidental. However, there has been speculation that the initial injury, the blow to the head, could have been accidental, and that the strangulation and staging of a kidnapping might have been an attempt to cover up the accident. The blow to JonBenet's head was severe enough to render her unconscious and possibly appear dead, even though it did not immediately kill her. The strangulation occurred approximately 45 minutes to 2 hours after the head injury, according to the autopsy report. This theory has been brought up in various discussions about the case, but it's important to stress that it is just a theory. Without more conclusive evidence, it's not possible to definitively say what happened the night JonBenet died. AI can generate probable statistical values. John Ramsey, 15%. Patsy Ramsey, 15%. Burke Ramsey, 10%. Gary Oliva, 5%. Michael Helgoth, 5%. Chris Wolf, 5%. Robert Christian Wolf, 4%. Linda Hoffman, Pugh, 3%. Mervyn Pugh, 3%. Fleet White, 3%. Jeff Merrick, 3%. Bill McReynolds, 2%. Glenn Mayer, 2%. Other Neighbor, 2%. Stephen Miles, 2%. Gary Merriman, 2%. Jim Marino, 2%. Lorraine Florence Lawrence, 1%. John Mark Carr, 1%. John Andrew Ramsey, 1%. Bill Ramsey Larry Ron, 1%. The O.J. Simpson Case. 1. Murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. On the evening of June 12, 1994, Nicole Brown Simpson, the ex-wife of O.J. Simpson, and Ron Goldman, a friend of Nicole's, were found brutally murdered outside Nicole's residence in Brentwood. Both victims had been stabbed multiple times. Nicole was also found with her throat slashed. The murders shocked the nation and received widespread media attention. 2. Discovery of evidence and investigation. The investigation focused on O.J. Simpson as the primary suspect due to his relationship with Nicole and the history of domestic violence between them. Bloodstains and other evidence, including a bloody glove, were discovered at the crime scene and at O.J. Simpson's residence, raising suspicions of his involvement. The Los Angeles Police Department initiated an extensive investigation collecting and analyzing evidence, conducting interviews, and pursuing leads. 3. O.J. Simpson Chase. On June 17, 1994, 5 days after the murders, O.J. Simpson, accompanied by his friend Al Cowlings, led police on a low-speed chase in a white Ford Bronco. The chase was broadcast live on television and captivated viewers across the country. During the pursuit, Simpson was in the back seat of the Bronco, holding a gun to his own head while Cowlings drove. The chase ended at Simpson's residence in Brentwood, where he eventually surrendered to the authorities. 4. Criminal trial. O.J. Simpson's criminal trial began on January 24, 1995, and lasted for months. It became one of the most highly publicized trials in American history. Prosecution presented evidence, including DNA analysis, bloodstains, and alleged motive, arguing that Simpson had killed Nicole and Ron. They portrayed him as an abusive and jealous ex-husband. The defense team, led by renowned attorneys Johnny Cochran, Robert Shapiro, and others, mounted a robust defense, challenging the credibility of the evidence and raising doubts about the Lapdias' handling of the investigation. On October 3, 1995, the jury reached a verdict, finding O.J. Simpson not guilty of the murders. The decision was met with intense public reaction and remains a subject of controversy. 5. Aftermath and civil trial. Following the criminal trial, a civil trial was held in 1997. The families of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman filed a wrongful death lawsuit against O.J. Simpson. In the civil trial, the jury found O.J. Simpson liable for the deaths of Nicole and Ron and ordered him to pay substantial damages to their families. The aftermath of the trials saw ongoing discussions about racial tensions, police conduct, and the judicial system's fairness. The O.J. Simpson case is known for its various unexplained anomalies, which have contributed to ongoing debates and discussions. Here are a few notable examples. 1. The missing murder weapon. One unexplained anomaly is the absence of the murder weapon used in the killings of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman. Despite extensive searches, a weapon matching the wounds inflicted on the victims was never discovered. This has raised questions about how the crime was committed and who may have been responsible. 2. The blood evidence. The blood evidence found at the crime scene and on O.J. Simpson's property has been subject to scrutiny. Some anomalies include the presence of blood drops forming a trail leading away from the crime scene, suggesting a potential transfer of blood. Additionally, the large amount of blood found at the crime scene raised questions about how the crime was committed without leaving a significant trail of blood outside the property. 3. Inconsistent timeline. There are discrepancies and unexplained gaps in O.J. Simpson's timeline on the night of the murders. Supporters of innocence argue that these inconsistencies create doubt regarding his involvement, as it is unclear how he could have committed the crimes and engaged in other activities during that time. 4. Alleged mishandling of evidence. Critics point to potential mishandling of evidence, such as the alleged tampering with and contamination of blood samples. These anomalies have raised concerns about the integrity and reliability of the evidence presented during the trial. 5. Lack of DNA evidence. Despite extensive DNA testing, O.J. Simpson's DNA was not found at the crime scene or on the victims. This absence of his DNA, coupled with the presence of DNA from other individuals, has led to questions about how and why his DNA was not detected if he was the perpetrator. The glove situation in the O.J. Simpson case refers to a critical piece of evidence, a leather glove. Recovered by the police, the glove was found at the crime scene, and another matching glove was found on O.J. Simpson's property. Here is an explanation of the glove situation and its significance during the trial. 1. Discovery of the glove. Detectives discovered a glove at the crime scene, located near the bodies of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. Another glove, matching the one found at the crime scene, was discovered on O.J. Simpson's property. This glove was found near his residence, hidden behind a bush. 2. The glove as evidence. The prosecution argued that the glove found at the crime scene and the one found at O.J. Simpson's property were crucial evidence linking him to the murders. The gloves were believed to be part of a set, similar to a pair that O.J. Simpson was seen wearing in photographs prior to the murders. 3. The glove demonstration during trial. In a significant moment during the trial, lead prosecutor Christopher Darden asked O.J. Simpson to try on the glove found at the crime scene in front of the jury. The glove appeared to be too tight and did not fit O.J. Simpson's hand properly. This led to Darden's famous phrase, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit," implying that the glove's poor fit weakened the prosecution's case. 4. Defense arguments. The defense argued that the glove was manipulated and tainted with evidence. They contended that it had been subjected to various environmental factors, such as exposure to blood and the drying process, which could have caused it to shrink and harden. Defense attorney Johnny Cochran argued that the glove was intentionally made to be too small to fit O.J. Simpson, suggesting a possible setup by law enforcement to incriminate him. 5. Impact on the trial. The glove demonstration had a significant impact on public perception and the trial itself. The defense successfully cast doubt on the validity of the glove as evidence, suggesting that it may have been tampered with or altered. The defense's arguments, combined with other factors, contributed to the reasonable doubt that the jury had about O.J. Simpson's guilt. The jury ultimately acquitted him of the charges. The glove situation became a symbolic moment in the trial, with supporters of O.J. Simpson arguing that the ill-fitting glove raised doubts about his involvement in the murders. However, critics maintain that the glove's fit may have been affected by various factors, and it should not be viewed as definitive proof of his innocence. These unexplained anomalies have contributed to the ongoing controversy surrounding the case. They highlight areas where questions remain and have fueled different interpretations and theories about what truly happened. Here are some notable experts who have analyzed the O.J. Simpson case, along with a brief summary of their theories or perspectives. 1. Barry Scheck. Scheck, a prominent defense attorney and co-founder of the Innocence Project, focused on challenging the DNA evidence presented during the trial. He argued that the DNA samples may have been contaminated or mishandled, which could have affected the reliability of the results. 2. Dr. Henry Lee. Lee, a renowned forensic scientist, offered expert testimony during the trial. He questioned the validity of some of the physical evidence and raised doubts about the timeline of events. Lee's analysis supported the defense's argument of potential mishandling of evidence. 3. Vincent Bugliosi. Bugliosi, a former prosecutor and author of the book Outrage. The 5 reasons why O.J. Simpson got away with murder argued that O.J. Simpson was guilty. He believed that the evidence overwhelmingly pointed to Simpson's culpability and criticized the defense's strategy during the trial. 4. Dr. Michael Baden. Baden, a forensic pathologist, offered expert analysis regarding the cause of death and the nature of the injuries sustained by Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. His conclusions aligned with the prosecution's argument of a violent and intentional attack. 5. Dr. Elizabeth Loftus. Loftus, a renowned cognitive psychologist and memory expert, testified as a defense expert during the trial. She presented arguments challenging the reliability of eyewitness testimonies and highlighted potential memory distortions, suggesting that witnesses may have been influenced by external factors. 6. Mark Feuerman. Foreman, a former detective involved in the case, provided expert analysis on police procedures and investigative techniques. However, he became a controversial figure due to allegations of racial bias and his use of racial slurs, which raised questions about the credibility of his testimony. Several body language experts have analyzed O.J. Simpson's behavior and demeanor throughout the O.J. Simpson case. While their interpretations may vary, they offer insights into his nonverbal cues and gestures during key moments. Here are some notable body language experts and their perspectives on O.J. Simpson. 1. Dr. Lillian Glass. Glass, a renowned body language expert, analyzed O.J. Simpson's behavior during the trial. She suggested that Simpson exhibited signs of deception and discomfort, such as inconsistent eye contact, fidgeting, and shifting body postures. 2. Janine Driver. Driver, an expert in deception detection and body language analysis, provided commentary on O.J. Simpson's nonverbal cues during the trial. She pointed out instances where Simpson displayed signs of nervousness, such as frequent swallowing and lip biting. 3. Susan Constantine. Constantine, a body language expert and jury consultant, focused on analyzing O.J. Simpson's behavior during critical moments of the trial. She highlighted instances where his nonverbal communication appeared defensive or evasive, suggesting discomfort and potential deception. 4. Mark Bowden. Bowden, a body language expert and author, examined O.J. Simpson's demeanor during televised interviews and court appearances. He observed signs of stress and anxiety, such as clenched fists, increased blinking, and shifts in breathing patterns. An analysis with points for and against O.J. Simpson's guilt, considering both the criminal and civil trials. Please note that while the criminal trial resulted in an acquittal, the civil trial found O.J. Simpson liable for the deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman. Here are the points for and against his guilt. Points for O.J. Simpson's guilt. 1. Circumstantial evidence. During the criminal trial, the prosecution presented circumstantial evidence linking O.J. Simpson to the murders, including bloodstains, DNA evidence, and his history of domestic violence. 2. Motive. O.J. Simpson's history of domestic violence and strained relationship with Nicole Brown Simpson provided a potential motive for the crime. Supporters of guilt argue that his anger and jealousy towards her may have driven him to commit the murders. 3. Inconsistent alibi. Critics point to inconsistencies and gaps in O.J. Simpson's alibi for the night of the murders. They argue that his inability to provide a solid and consistent account raises doubts about his innocence. 4. Civil trial verdict. In the subsequent civil trial, a jury found O.J. Simpson liable for the deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman. Supporters of guilt argue that this verdict reinforces the belief in his culpability. Points against O.J. Simpson's guilt. 1. Reasonable doubt. The defense successfully raised reasonable doubt during the criminal trial, highlighting potential mishandling and tampering of evidence, which undermined its reliability. This doubt played a significant role in the jury's acquittal. 2. Lack of murder weapon. The murder weapon used in the crimes was never definitively identified or linked to O.J. Simpson. Critics argue that the absence of a murder weapon raises questions about his direct involvement. 3. Alternative suspects. The defense presented alternative suspects during the trial, suggesting the possibility of unknown perpetrators. They argued that the investigation did not thoroughly explore these other potential culprits, casting doubt on O.J. Simpson's exclusive involvement. 4. Civil trial burden of proof. Critics argue that the burden of proof in a civil trial is lower than in a criminal trial. Therefore, the finding of liability in the civil trial does not carry the same weight as a criminal conviction. It's crucial to consider that while the criminal trial resulted in an acquittal, the civil trial found O.J. Simpson liable based on a different burden of proof. The points presented here reflect arguments made during both trials and subsequent discussions. The question of O.J. Simpson's guilt remains a complex and debated topic, with different interpretations and perspectives on the evidence presented. Points for O.J. Simpson's guilt in the civil trial. 1. Preponderance of evidence. The prosecution in the civil trial presented a compelling case with a preponderance of evidence suggesting O.J. Simpson's guilt. This included testimony from expert witnesses, forensic evidence, and documentation of his history of domestic violence. 2. Admissions of liability. Critics argue that during the civil trial, O.J. Simpson made certain statements or admissions that implied his involvement or knowledge of the crimes, thereby supporting the argument for his guilt. 3. Damages awarded. The jury's decision to award substantial damages to the families of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman is seen by some as an acknowledgement of O.J. Simpson's responsibility for their deaths. Points against O.J. Simpson's guilt in the civil trial. 1. Lower burden of proof. The burden of proof in a civil trial is lower than in a criminal trial, with the requirement being a preponderance of evidence rather than proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Critics argue that this lower standard may have influenced the outcome and does not necessarily indicate his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. 2. Double jeopardy. O.J. Simpson had already been acquitted in the criminal trial, and some argue that trying him again in the civil trial violated the principle of double jeopardy, where an individual cannot be tried twice for the same offense. 3. Different standards of evidence. The civil trial allowed the admission of evidence that was not admissible in the criminal trial. Critics suggest that the inclusion of this additional evidence might have influenced the outcome and does not necessarily prove Simpson's guilt in the criminal context. Statistical likelihood of O.J. Simpson's guilt. Based on the available evidence and the outcome of the criminal trial, AI can assign statistical values as follows. Guilty, 30%. Not guilty, 70%. Not factoring the trial verdict. Guilty, 75%. Not guilty, 25%. Additional theories. Here's an overview of each theory. 1. O.J. Simpson being framed. This theory suggests that law enforcement officials deliberately planted evidence and manipulated the investigation to frame O.J. Simpson. Proponents of this theory argue that there were irregularities and inconsistencies in the handling of evidence, casting doubt on the integrity of the investigation. 2. A botched drug deal. This theory posits that the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman were linked to a drug deal gone wrong, in which individuals associated with Simpson were involved. It suggests that the motive behind the murders was related to conflicts or disputes within the drug trade. 3. Involvement of a serial killer. Some theorists propose that the murders were the work of a serial killer operating in the area. They argue that the crime scene bore similarities to other unsolved cases and that the true killer went undetected due to the focus on O.J. Simpson as the primary suspect. 4. Conspiracy cover-up. This theory contends that there was a larger conspiracy involving multiple individuals to hide the true identity of the killer. It suggests that influential figures or organizations had a vested interest in protecting the real perpetrator and that the evidence against Simpson was manipulated or suppressed. 5. Jealousy or revenge-related motive. This theory suggests that the murders were motivated by jealousy or revenge connected to Nicole Brown Simpson's personal life. It proposes that someone with a personal vendetta against her, such as an ex-lover or acquaintance, carried out the killings. 6. Police mishandling of evidence. Some argue that the investigation was marred by errors and mishandling of crucial evidence by law enforcement officials. This theory suggests that mistakes in preserving and analyzing evidence may have compromised the integrity of the case and hindered the pursuit of alternative suspects. 7. Ignored or mishandled DNA evidence. This theory implies that there may have been DNA evidence pointing to an alternate suspect or suspects that was either ignored or mishandled during the investigation. It suggests that a more thorough examination of DNA evidence might have led to different conclusions. 8. Organized crime involvement. This theory proposes that the murders were connected to O.J. Simpson's alleged involvement in organized crime. It suggests that the motive behind the killings might have been linked to criminal activities or associations that Simpson was a part of. 9. Involvement of a family member. Some theorists speculate that a family member of O.J. Simpson, such as his son, might have been involved in the murders. This theory suggests that Simpson protected the actual perpetrator to shield his loved one from the consequences. Points for Jason Simpson's involvement. A. Potential motive. Some argue that Jason Simpson had a motive to harm Nicole Brown Simpson due to ongoing tension between her and his father, O.J. Simpson. It is suggested that Jason may have acted out of anger or resentment. B. History of violence. Supporters of this theory point to instances of alleged violent behavior by Jason Simpson. They claim that he had a history of anger issues and could have been capable of committing such a crime. C.A. Access to the crime scene. Jason Simpson had access to O.J. Simpson's house, which was the location where Nicole Brown Simpson was murdered. This proximity could potentially suggest that he had the opportunity to commit the crime. D. Uncertain alibi. Some assert that Jason Simpson's alibi for the night of the murders is questionable. They argue that there are inconsistencies and gaps in his account of his whereabouts during that time. Points against Jason Simpson's involvement. A. Lack of concrete evidence. The theory of Jason Simpson's involvement is largely based on speculation and circumstantial factors. There is no direct evidence linking him to the crime scene or the murders. B. No motive beyond speculation. While there are claims of tension between Nicole Brown Simpson and Jason, there is no concrete evidence to support a specific motive for him to commit the murders. See alibi and lack of physical evidence. Supporters of Jason's innocence argue that he provided an alibi for the night of the murders supported by witness testimonies. Additionally, there is no physical evidence linking him to the crime scene, such as DNA or fingerprints. D. Focus on O.J. Simpson. The investigation and subsequent trial primarily focused on O.J. Simpson as the main suspect. The defense argued that evidence pointed to an alternative scenario and did not involve Jason Simpson. 10. Random act of violence. This theory suggests that the murders were a random act of violence committed by an unknown assailant with no direct connection to O.J. Simpson. It posits that the victims were simply at the wrong place at the wrong time, and their deaths were the result of unfortunate circumstances. AI can assign statistical values as follows. 1. O.J. Simpson being framed, 25%. 2. A botched drug deal, 15%. 3. Involvement of a serial killer, 10%. 4. Conspiracy cover-up, 20%. 5. Jealousy or revenge-related motive, 15%. 6. Police mishandling of evidence, 10%. 7. Ignored or mishandled DNA evidence, 5%. 8. Organized crime involvement, 10%. 9. Involvement of a family member, 5%. 10. Random act of violence, 5%. The Maura Murray case. Maura Murray was a 21-year-old college student who disappeared under puzzling circumstances on February 9, 2004, in Haverhill, New Hampshire. The case has presented numerous theories and speculations, making it an enigma that continues to intrigue investigators and armchair detectives alike. One theory suggests that Maura Murray may have been experiencing personal issues or emotional distress at the time of her disappearance. Some believe that she embarked on a journey to escape her problems or seek solace. However, without concrete evidence, it's challenging to ascertain her exact motivations. Another theory revolves around the possibility of foul play. It is speculated that Maura encountered an individual or a group of people who may have caused her harm. The remote and secluded nature of the area where she vanished could have facilitated such an occurrence. Additionally, there are theories involving the involvement of local residents or even someone she knew personally. Speculation suggests that Maura's disappearance could be linked to a hidden relationship, someone with ill intentions, or an accidental encounter that took a sinister turn. The lack of substantial evidence and the absence of definitive answers have made it difficult to draw definitive conclusions. However, the case remains open, and efforts to unravel the truth persist. Was Maura Murray at the scene of where her vehicle was discovered in New Hampshire? Evidence for Maura Murray being at the accident scene. 1. Vehicle ownership. The vehicle involved in the accident belonged to Maura Murray. 2. Witness sighting. A witness reported seeing a young woman matching Maura's description at the scene shortly after the accident. 3. Personal belongings. Maura's personal belongings, including her phone and debit card, were found inside the vehicle. 4. Footprints. Footprints believed to be Maura's were found in the snow leading away from the accident scene. 5. Blood evidence. A small amount of Maura's blood was discovered inside the vehicle, suggesting her presence. Evidence against Maura Murray being at the accident scene. 1. Lack of conclusive proof. Despite extensive searches, no further evidence of Maura's presence, such as DNA or additional footprints, has been discovered at the accident scene. 2. No confirmed sightings. No credible sightings or reliable witness accounts have placed Maura at the accident scene after the initial witness sighting. 3. No communication. Maura has had no contact with family, friends, or authorities since her disappearance, suggesting the possibility of her absence from the accident scene. 4. Vehicle damage. Some have argued that the severity of the vehicle's damage and the lack of visible injuries to Maura raise questions about whether she was actually present at the accident scene. 5. Unidentified person of interest. A witness reported seeing an unidentified person at the accident scene who has not been definitively connected to Maura. Analysis of probability. Maura Murray was the driver of the Saturn and present at the scene. Yes, 30. 1%. No, 69%. Why did it take so long for the ATM images to be released? The timing of releasing last known images in missing persons cases can vary based on a variety of factors and circumstances. While immediate release of such images is common in some cases, there can be reasons for delays in others. Here are some possible explanations, but please note that these are speculative and may not directly apply to the Maura Murray case. 1. Ongoing investigation. Law enforcement agencies might choose to withhold certain information, including last known images, to protect the integrity of an ongoing investigation. Releasing such images immediately could potentially compromise the investigation or endanger the missing person. 2. Prioritization of information. Law enforcement agencies prioritize the release of information based on their assessment of its relevance and potential impact on the case. Other details or evidence may be deemed more crucial at certain stages of the investigation. 3. Strategic considerations. Timing of image releases can be influenced by strategic considerations such as waiting for a critical point in the investigation, gathering additional evidence, or obtaining witness statements before making the images public. 4. Privacy concerns. In some cases, the release of last known images may involve considerations related to privacy, consent, or the involvement of minors. Law enforcement agencies may need to navigate legal requirements and protect the rights of all individuals involved. 5. Investigation techniques. Law enforcement may employ various investigative techniques and strategies that impact the timing of releasing certain information, including last known images. These techniques aim to maximize the chances of solving the case or locating the missing person. Again, it is important to note that these are general insights and may not directly address the specific reasons behind the timing of releasing the last known image in the Maura Murray case. Image analysis. Is it Maura Murray in the ATM images? If over 80% similarity, it is reasonable to conclude the person in both images is one and the same. Similarity match. 47.82%. Why was the FBI not more involved? 1. Jurisdictional limitations. The jurisdiction for investigating missing persons cases typically falls under local law enforcement agencies, unless specific criteria are met for federal involvement. If the case did not meet the necessary requirements, such as evidence of interstate abduction or a potential federal crime, the FBI may have limited jurisdiction to intervene. 2. Resource allocation. The FBI is a federal agency with numerous responsibilities and limited resources. They must prioritize their involvement based on factors such as the severity of the crime, potential threats to national security, and the availability of resources. If the Maura Murray case did not meet certain criteria for prioritization, the FBI's involvement might have been limited. 3. Collaboration with local law enforcement. In many missing persons cases, the FBI works in collaboration with local law enforcement agencies. If the local authorities took the lead in the investigation and requested the FBI's assistance, the FBI's involvement may have been more supportive or advisory rather than taking a primary role. 4. Evidence and leads. The level of FBI involvement can be influenced by the presence of specific evidence or leads that would warrant their specialized resources and expertise. If the case did not present significant federal-level factors or developments, the FBI's involvement may have been limited. 5. Confidentiality and ongoing investigations. The FBI typically maintains confidentiality about their involvement in ongoing investigations. While the extent of their involvement in the Maura Murray case may not be publicly known, it does not necessarily indicate a lack of FBI involvement behind the scenes. It is important to note that the specific reasons for the level of FBI involvement in the Maura Murray case are not publicly disclosed, and it is ultimately up to law enforcement agencies to determine the extent of federal involvement based on the circumstances and evidence available to them. Bill Rausch. Points for Bill Rausch's involvement. 1. Bill Rausch was Maura Murray's boyfriend at the time of her disappearance, which could potentially raise suspicions about his involvement. 2. Some individuals have speculated that Bill's behavior following Maura's disappearance was suspicious or inconsistent with expectations. 3. The intimate relationship between Maura and Bill might suggest that he would have had the opportunity and motive to harm her. 4. Questions have been raised about Bill's alibi and actions on the day of Maura's disappearance. 5. Speculation and theories circulating in online communities and discussions have focused on Bill Rausch's possible involvement. Points against Bill Rausch's involvement. 1. No concrete evidence or official findings have implicated Bill Rausch in Maura Murray's disappearance. 2. Bill has cooperated with law enforcement and participated in interviews and media coverage surrounding the case. 3. The involvement of law enforcement agencies and investigators would suggest that they have not found substantial evidence to implicate Bill Rausch. Erin Larkin. Points for Erin Larkin's involvement. 1. Known connection. Erin Larkin was a close friend and former roommate of Maura Murray, which suggests a potential connection to the case. 2. Access to information. As a close friend, Erin may have had insights or knowledge about Maura's plans, state of mind, or circumstances leading up to her disappearance. 3. Behavior and interactions. Some individuals have raised questions about Erin's behavior or statements following Maura's disappearance, which has led to speculation about her involvement. 4. Possible motive. Without concrete evidence, some theories suggest that Erin may have had a motive to harm or have knowledge of Maura's whereabouts due to personal reasons or conflicts. 5. Unconfirmed reports. There have been unverified reports and claims circulating online that suggest Erin's involvement in the case. Points against Erin Larkin's involvement. 1. Lack of evidence. No concrete evidence has emerged to directly implicate Erin Larkin in Maura Murray's disappearance. 2. Ongoing investigation. Law enforcement agencies have not made any official statements or identified Erin as a person of interest in the case. 3. Cooperation with authorities. There is no public indication that Erin Larkin has refused to cooperate with investigators or hindered the investigation. 4. Lack of confirmation. Unverified reports and speculation should not be equated with confirmed guilt or involvement. Kate Markopoulos. Points for Kate Markopoulos's involvement. 1. Close friendship. Kate Markopoulos was a close friend of Maura Murray, which suggests a potential connection and proximity to the case. 2. Knowledge of Maura's plans. Being a friend, Kate may have had insights into Maura's plans, intentions, or any potential factors that could have contributed to her disappearance. 3. Inconsistencies in statements. Some individuals have raised questions about the consistency of Kate's statements or behavior following Maura's disappearance, which has led to speculation about her involvement. 4. Potential motive. Without concrete evidence, theories suggest that Kate might have had a motive to harm Maura or have knowledge of her whereabouts due to personal reasons or conflicts. 5. Unverified reports. There have been unverified reports and claims circulating online that suggest Kate's involvement in the case. Points against Kate Markopoulos's involvement. 1. Lack of evidence. No concrete evidence has emerged to directly implicate Kate Markopoulos in Maura Murray's disappearance. 2. No official suspicion. Law enforcement agencies have not identified Kate as a person of interest or made any official statements regarding her involvement. 3. No corroborating witnesses. No witnesses have come forward to support the theory of Kate's involvement or provide credible information. 4. Speculation and unverified claims. Unverified reports and speculation should not be equated with confirmed guilt or involvement. Sarah Alfieri. Points for Sarah Alfieri's involvement. 1. Relationship with Maura. Sarah Alfieri was a friend of Maura Murray, which suggests a potential connection and proximity to the case. 2. Communication prior to disappearance. Some individuals have raised questions about the nature of the communication between Maura and Sarah, leading up to Maura's disappearance, which has led to speculation about Sarah's involvement. 3. Inconsistencies in statements. Supporters of this theory argue that Sarah may have made inconsistent statements or displayed suspicious behavior following Maura's disappearance, raising questions about her potential involvement. 4. Personal conflicts. The theory suggests that personal conflicts or unresolved issues between Sarah and Maura could have played a role in Maura's disappearance. 5. Unverified reports. There have been unverified reports and claims circulating online that suggest Sarah's involvement in the case. Points against Sarah Alfieri's involvement. 1. Lack of evidence. No concrete evidence has emerged to directly implicate Sarah Alfieri in Maura Murray's disappearance. 2. No official suspicion. Law enforcement agencies have not identified Sarah as a person of interest or made any official statements regarding her involvement. 3. Presumption of innocence. It is important to respect the presumption of innocence and avoid making unfounded accusations without verified evidence. 4. No corroborating witnesses. No witnesses have come forward to support the theory of Sarah's involvement or provide credible information. 5. Speculation and unverified claims. Unverified reports and speculation should not be equated with confirmed guilt or involvement. Analysis regarding persons known to Maura being responsible for her disappearance. Bill Rausch, 20%. Aaron Larkin, 10%. Kate Markopoulos, 5%. Sarah Alfieri, 2%. Analysis of 10 other theories. Runaway theory. Points 4. Maura was facing personal issues, including recent troubles at school and with her boyfriend. She packed her belongings and left her dormitory, indicating a planned departure. Her internet search history included inquiries about lodging and directions, suggesting she may have been planning to start a new life. Maura withdrew a significant amount of cash from her bank account before her disappearance, which could support the idea of fleeing. No sightings or evidence of her presence have been reported since her disappearance, indicating a deliberate effort to remain hidden. Points against. Leaving her personal belongings behind, such as her credit cards, suggests she may not have intended to disappear voluntarily. Maura was close to her family, and it seems unlikely she would willingly leave without maintaining contact. The lack of any subsequent communication or sightings raises doubts about the runaway theory. Despite extensive searches, no evidence of Maura's whereabouts or new identity has emerged. There were no signs of premeditation or long-term planning before her disappearance. Suicide theory. Points 4. Maura had recently experienced personal setbacks and was reportedly upset during her final phone conversation. She withdrew a large sum of money and packed some of her belongings, potentially indicating a final act. The isolated location where she disappeared could have provided an opportunity to carry out a suicide without immediate detection. Maura's family history included instances of depression and mental health issues, raising the possibility of suicide. No concrete evidence of her presence or communication has surfaced since her disappearance. Points against. No suicide note or message has been found to confirm her intent. Despite extensive searches, no remains or evidence of self-harm have been discovered. The lack of any sightings or indications of suicide makes it difficult to draw a definitive conclusion. The decision to disappear in such a remote area might complicate the act of suicide, hindering the likelihood of it going undetected. Maura had plans for the following days and appeared to have a future-oriented mindset, suggesting a reduced likelihood of suicide. Abduction theory. Points 4. Maura vanished under mysterious circumstances with no witnesses or clear explanation. The isolated location and late hour of her disappearance provided an opportunity for someone to target her. Possible motives for abduction could include human trafficking or a random act of violence. The lack of any communication or sightings since her disappearance raises the possibility of her being held against her will. The existence of other unsolved cases in the area lends support to the idea of a predator or abductor operating in the vicinity. Points against. No evidence of a struggle or signs of forced entry into Maura's vehicle have been found. The remote area where she disappeared makes it less likely for someone to stumble upon her without leaving a trace. No witnesses have come forward with information regarding an abduction. The absence of demands or ransom requests diminishes the likelihood of a targeted abduction. The lack of any concrete evidence or leads regarding her whereabouts makes it challenging to investigate an abduction scenario. Butch Atwood. Butch Atwood's involvement. 1. Last known interaction. Butch Atwood was the last known person to have interacted with Maura Murray before her disappearance. This fact raises questions about his potential knowledge or involvement in her disappearance. 2. Inconsistent statements. Supporters of this theory argue that Butch Atwood provided inconsistent statements regarding the events leading up to and following Maura's disappearance, which could indicate involvement or knowledge of what happened. 3. Failed polygraph. It has been reported that Butch Atwood failed a polygraph test when questioned about Maura's disappearance. This could raise suspicions about his potential involvement, as a failed polygraph can be seen as an indication of deception. 4. Opportunity and proximity. As a nearby resident and bus driver who came across Maura's accident, Butch Atwood had the opportunity and proximity to be involved in her disappearance. 5. Potential motive. Supporters of this theory speculate that Butch Atwood may have had a motive to harm Maura or knowledge of her whereabouts due to personal reasons or conflicts. Points against Butch Atwood's involvement. 1. Lack of conclusive evidence. No concrete evidence has emerged to directly implicate Butch Atwood in Maura Murray's disappearance. 2. No official suspicion. Law enforcement agencies have not identified Butch Atwood as a person of interest or made any official statements regarding his involvement. 3. Polygraph reliability. Polygraph tests are not considered infallible and are not admissible as evidence in many jurisdictions. Therefore, the results of a failed polygraph test should be treated with caution. 4. Lack of corroborating witnesses. No witnesses have come forward to support the theory of Butch Atwood's involvement or provide credible information. Rick Forcia. Points for Rick Forcier's involvement. 1. Known association. Rick Forcier had an acquaintance with Maura Murray, which raises questions about any potential knowledge or involvement he may have had in her disappearance. 2. Criminal record. Supporters of this theory argue that Rick Forcier's criminal record, including charges related to domestic violence and firearms, could suggest a potential inclination towards violence or involvement in unlawful activities. 3. Proximity and timing. As a resident of the area where Maura disappeared, Rick Forcier had proximity to the location and could have been involved in the events surrounding her disappearance. 4. Lack of alibi. Supporters of this theory claim that Rick Forcier lacked a solid alibi during the time of Maura's disappearance, which may raise suspicions about his involvement. 5. Unverified claims. There have been unverified claims and rumors circulating online that suggest Rick Forcier's involvement in the case, though it is important to treat such information with caution and verify its credibility. Points against Rick Forcier's involvement. 1. No concrete evidence. No concrete evidence has emerged to directly implicate Rick Forcier in Maura Murray's disappearance. 2. No official suspicion. Law enforcement agencies have not identified Rick Forcier as a person of interest or made any official statements regarding his involvement. 3. Lack of corroborating witnesses. No witnesses have come forward to support the theory of Rick Forcier's involvement or provide credible information. 4. Speculation and unverified claims. Unverified reports and speculation should not be treated as verified evidence, and it is crucial to rely on credible information and official investigations to uncover the truth. Tim and Faith Westman. Points for the Westmans' involvement. 1. Key witnesses. The Westmans were key witnesses in the Maura Murray case, as they reported seeing her vehicle and a male standing near it on the night of her disappearance. Some supporters of this theory argue that their involvement could extend beyond being mere witnesses. 2. Inconsistencies in statements. Supporters claim that there are inconsistencies in the Westmans' statements regarding the events of that night. These inconsistencies may raise suspicions about their potential involvement or knowledge. 3. Close proximity. The Westmans lived in close proximity to the scene where Maura's vehicle was found. This proximity could have provided them with opportunities to be involved or have knowledge of her disappearance. 4. Unverified claims. There have been unverified claims and rumors circulating online that suggest the Westmans' involvement in the case, though it is important to treat such information with caution and verify its credibility. 5. Motive. Supporters of this theory speculate that the Westmans may have had a motive to harm Maura or knowledge of her whereabouts, which could explain their involvement. Points against the Westmans' involvement. 1. Lack of concrete evidence. No concrete evidence has emerged to directly implicate the Westmans in Maura Murray's disappearance. 2. No official suspicion. Law enforcement agencies have not identified the Westmans as persons of interest or made any official statements regarding their involvement. 3. Lack of corroborating witnesses. No witnesses have come forward to support the theory of the Westmans' involvement or provide credible information. 4. Speculation and unverified claims. Unverified reports and speculation should not be treated as verified evidence, and it is crucial to rely on credible information and official investigations to uncover the truth. Analysis of neighbors being responsible for Maura Murray's abduction. Butch Atwood, 15%. Rick Forcier, 10%. The Westmans, 5%. Accident theory. Points for: Maura's car was involved in a single vehicle accident before her disappearance, potentially causing injuries. The area where she crashed was desolate and isolated, reducing the chances of immediate discovery. She may have sought help on foot and become disoriented or succumbed to the harsh weather conditions. Points against: despite extensive searches, no evidence of Maura's crash site or her remains have been found. The lack of any eyewitness accounts or reports of a distressed individual in the vicinity makes it difficult to support the accident theory. The search efforts, including the use of tracking dogs, did not lead to any signs of Maura's presence or a potential accident scene. It is puzzling why Maura would leave her vehicle if she had only experienced a minor accident and was not injured. The extensive search efforts and technological advancements employed during the investigation would likely have detected any nearby accident scenes. Wilderness theory. Points for: the area surrounding Maura's disappearance is dense with woods and rugged terrain, making it easy to become lost or disoriented. If Maura wandered into the wilderness, it would explain the lack of evidence or sightings. The harsh winter conditions, including cold temperatures and snowfall, could have led to hypothermia or other exposure-related dangers. The dense vegetation and challenging terrain could have impeded search efforts, making it difficult to locate her. If Maura succumbed to the elements, her remains may be concealed or scattered, contributing to the lack of discovery. Points against: despite extensive searches, including the use of tracking dogs and aerial surveillance, no evidence of Maura's presence in the wilderness has been found. The search efforts involved experts familiar with the local terrain, reducing the likelihood of missing obvious signs. It is unclear why Maura would venture into the wilderness, especially considering the harsh winter conditions and her lack of appropriate gear. The absence of any trace, such as footprints or other signs of her presence, raises doubts about the wilderness theory. The The likelihood of stumbling upon a person or encountering a road or structure after wandering for a significant distance diminishes the plausibility of the theory. Serial killer theory. Points for the existence of unsolved cases and disappearances in the area suggests the presence of a serial killer. Maura's disappearance shares similarities with other cases, including the isolated location and lack of witnesses. The absence of a clear motive or apparent link to Maura's personal life supports the idea of a random abduction by a serial killer. The remote nature of the area provides an opportunity for a killer to operate undetected. The lack of evidence or leads in multiple cases strengthens the possibility of a serial killer at large. Points against. No concrete evidence has emerged connecting Maura's case to a known serial killer or a pattern of similar disappearances. The absence of identified victims or specific modus operandi makes it challenging to definitively establish a serial killer connection. Investigations have not uncovered evidence of other victims in the same area or any leads that conclusively tie Maura's disappearance to a serial killer. The focus on Maura's personal circumstances and the isolated location makes it less likely for a serial killer to have specifically targeted her. The lack of confirmed evidence or witness testimony linking Maura's disappearance to a serial killer weakens this theory. Police involvement theory. Points for 1. Some speculate that local law enforcement may have been involved in a cover-up or mishandling of the case, potentially to protect one of their own. 2. The initial response to the scene and subsequent investigation raised questions about potential police misconduct, including allegations of evidence tampering and mishandling. 3. Reports of a staged accident scene have fueled suspicions of police involvement. 4. The lack of transparency and inconsistencies in the investigation have further fueled doubts about the actions of law enforcement. 5. The existence of unresolved issues and unanswered questions surrounding the actions of law enforcement officials strengthens the possibility of their involvement. Points against. 1. No concrete evidence has emerged to substantiate claims of police misconduct or a cover-up. 2. The involvement of multiple agencies in the investigation makes it challenging to maintain a unified conspiracy involving all law enforcement officials. 3. The absence of a clear motive for police to be involved in Maura's disappearance diminishes the likelihood of their direct involvement. 4. The ongoing efforts by investigators and subsequent developments have not pointed definitively towards police involvement. 5. The focus on Maura's personal circumstances and the isolated location of her disappearance make it less likely for law enforcement to have specifically targeted her. Cecil Smith. Points for Cecil Smith's involvement. 1. Presence at the scene. Cecil Smith was the first police officer to respond to the scene of Maura Murray's car accident. Supporters of this theory argue that his close proximity to the events raises questions about his potential involvement. 2. Inconsistent statements. Some supporters claim that Cecil Smith provided inconsistent statements regarding the events of that night or the actions he took during the initial response, which could raise suspicions about his involvement or knowledge. 3. Lack of thorough investigation. Critics argue that Cecil Smith's initial response to the scene and subsequent investigation may have been inadequate or biased, potentially indicating a desire to cover up his own involvement. 4. Motive. Supporters speculate that Cecil Smith may have had a motive to harm Maura or knowledge of her whereabouts due to personal reasons or conflicts. 5. Unverified claims. There have been unverified claims and rumors circulating online that suggest Cecil Smith's involvement in the case, though it is important to treat such information with caution and verify its credibility. Points against Cecil Smith's involvement. 1. No concrete evidence. No concrete evidence has emerged to directly implicate Cecil Smith in Maura Murray's disappearance. 2. No official suspicion. Law enforcement agencies have not identified Cecil Smith as a person of interest or made any official statements regarding his involvement. 3. Lack of corroborating witnesses. No witnesses have come forward to support the theory of Cecil Smith's involvement or provide credible information. 4. Speculation and unverified claims. Unverified reports and speculation should not be treated as verified evidence, and it is crucial to rely on credible information and official investigations to uncover the truth. Bruce McKay. Points for Bruce McKay's involvement. 1. History of misconduct. Supporters of this theory may argue that Bruce McKay's history of alleged misconduct and aggressive behavior could indicate a propensity for violence or abuse of power. 2. Encounter with Maura Murray. Bruce McKay had encountered Maura Murray in a previous incident, leading some to speculate about a potential connection between the two events. 3. Access to information. As a law enforcement officer, Bruce McKay would have had access to information and resources that could potentially aid in a cover-up or hinder the investigation. 4. Retaliation. Supporters of this theory may suggest that McKay may have had a motive for harming Maura Murray due to personal reasons or conflicts. 5. Unverified claims. There have been unverified claims and rumors circulating online that suggest Bruce McKay's involvement in the case, though it is important to treat such information with caution and verify its credibility. Points against Bruce McKay's involvement. 1. No concrete evidence. No concrete evidence has emerged to directly implicate Bruce McKay in Maura Murray's disappearance. 2. No official suspicion. Law enforcement agencies have not identified Bruce McKay as a person of interest or made any official statements regarding his involvement. 3. Lack of corroborating witnesses. No witnesses have come forward to support the theory of Bruce McKay's involvement or provide credible information. 4. Speculation and unverified claims. Unverified reports and speculation should not be treated as verified evidence, and it is crucial to rely on credible information and official investigations to uncover the truth. Jeff Williams. Points for Police Chief Jeff Williams's involvement. 1. Position of authority. As the police chief, Jeff Williams held a position of authority and could potentially have had the ability to manipulate the investigation or cover up any wrongdoing. 2. Control over the narrative. Supporters of this theory may argue that as the police chief, Jeff Williams had the power to control the flow of information and potentially shape the public perception of the case. 3. Potential motive. Supporters may speculate on possible motives such as personal conflicts, hidden agendas, or the desire to protect someone connected to the case. 4. Lack of transparency. Critics claim that the lack of transparency and delays in the investigation may indicate an attempt to conceal information or protect individuals involved, potentially including the police chief himself. 5. Unverified claims. There have been unverified claims and rumors circulating online that suggest Police Chief Jeff Williams's involvement in the case, though it is important to treat such information with caution and verify its credibility. Points against Police Chief Jeff Williams's involvement. 1. No concrete evidence. No concrete evidence has emerged to directly implicate Police Chief Jeff Williams in Maura Murray's disappearance. 2. No official suspicion. Law enforcement agencies have not identified Police Chief Jeff Williams as a person of interest or made any official statements regarding his involvement. 3. Lack of corroborating witnesses. No witnesses have come forward to support the theory of Police Chief Jeff Williams's involvement or provide credible information. Analysis regarding law enforcement being responsible for her disappearance. Cecil Smith, 20%. Bruce McKay, 10%. Jeff Williams, 5%. Witness protection theory. Points for 1. Speculation suggests that Mara may have entered witness protection due to undisclosed circumstances. 2. The sudden nature of her disappearance and the absence of communication align with the need for secrecy. 3. The protection program would explain the lack of contact with family and friends. 4. Mara's unexplained actions and her desire to escape her current life may support this theory. 5. The nature of witness protection makes it difficult for external parties to verify or locate individuals in the program. Points against. 1. No evidence or indications have emerged to support the theory of Mara's involvement in any witness protection program. 2. Witness protection programs typically involve coordination with law enforcement, and no official statements or indications have been made regarding Mara's inclusion in such a program. 3. The lack of communication or sightings raises doubts about her ability to maintain a low profile for an extended period. 4. Witness protection typically involves a carefully planned transition, which would likely involve coordination with family and close friends. 5. The absence of a confirmed connection between Mara's circumstances and the need for witness protection weakens this theory. Was Maura Murray a confidential informant? Points for Maura Murray being a confidential informant. 1. Unexplained behavior. Supporters of this theory argue that some of Mara's unexplained behavior, such as leaving school abruptly and making false statements, could be consistent with the actions of a confidential informant. 2. Mysterious disappearance. The theory suggests that Mara's sudden disappearance could be linked to her involvement as a confidential informant, leading to potential risks and dangers. 3. Concealed identity. If Mara were a confidential informant, it is possible that her true identity and involvement were kept hidden, making it difficult for law enforcement to reveal any information. 4. Lack of information release. The limited information released by law enforcement and potential delays in the investigation could be attributed to the need to protect Mara's confidential informant status. 5. Lack of concrete evidence. Supporters argue that the absence of concrete evidence pointing to Mara's whereabouts could be due to the sensitive nature of her involvement as a confidential informant. Analysis of the probability Mara may have been a confidential informant, 20%. Accidental death and cover-up theory. Explanation. This theory suggests that Maura Murray's disappearance and subsequent lack of information or evidence are a result of an accidental death occurring at the scene, followed by a cover-up by individuals involved. Points for the theory. 1. Accident at the scene. It is theorized that Maura may have been involved in an accident or mishap near her vehicle, which resulted in her death. 2. Fear of consequences. The theory suggests that the individuals present at the scene panicked and decided to cover up the accident to avoid legal consequences or implications. 3. Remote location. The isolated location of the accident scene provided an opportunity for those involved to conceal the incident without immediate detection. 4. Lack of visible remains. Supporters of this theory argue that the absence of Maura's remains or significant evidence is consistent with an accidental death followed by a cover-up. 5. Behavior of individuals. Some individuals connected to the case have displayed suspicious behavior or inconsistencies in their statements, which has led to speculation about their involvement in a cover-up. Points against the theory. 1. Lack of evidence. Despite extensive searches and investigations, no concrete evidence has emerged to support the theory of an accidental death followed by a cover-up. 2. No visible remains. The absence of Maura's remains or substantial physical evidence makes it challenging to support the theory of an accidental death. 3. No confession or whistleblowing. No individuals involved in the alleged accident or subsequent cover-up have come forward to confess or provide credible information, weakening the theory. 4. Involvement of multiple parties. A cover-up involving multiple individuals is challenging to maintain without leaks or corroborating evidence. 5. Alternate possibilities. Other theories, such as voluntary disappearance or abduction, present alternative explanations for Mara's disappearance, which contradict the accidental death and cover-up theory. Analysis of probabilities of these theories. Abduction theory, 25%, runaway theory, 15%, suicide theory, 10%, accident theory, 10%, wilderness theory, 10%, police involvement theory, 10%, serial killer theory, 10%, witness protection theory, 5%, accidental death cover-up theory, 45%. If not directly responsible for what happened to Maura Murray, analysis of probabilities the following parties know what happened to her. Bill Rausch, 25%. Kate Markopoulos, 15%. Sarah Alfieri, 10%. Cecil Smith, 5%. Jeff Williams, 5%. Bruce McKay, 5%. Kathleen Murray, 5%. Tim Carpenter, 5%. Fred Murray, 5%. Julie Murray, 5%. Aaron Larkin, 50%. Is there a massive cover-up in the Maura Murray case? If there were to be a massive cover-up in the Maura Murray case, it could involve the following points. 1. Suppression of evidence. The cover-up could involve efforts to suppress or hide crucial evidence related to Maura's disappearance, such as surveillance footage, witness testimonies, or forensic evidence. 2. Misdirection and false leads. Those involved in the cover-up might intentionally misdirect investigators by providing false leads, diverting attention away from the truth of what happened to Maura. 3. Manipulation of witnesses. The cover-up could involve attempts to manipulate or intimidate potential witnesses, preventing them from coming forward with crucial information about the case. 4. Corruption within law enforcement. The cover-up could extend to corruption within the law enforcement agencies involved in the investigation, potentially leading to the deliberate obstruction of justice. 5. Higher level involvement. In a hypothetical scenario, a massive cover-up might involve individuals in positions of power or influence who have a vested interest in preventing the truth from being revealed. Analysis at the chance of a cover-up in the Maura Murray case, 40%. Darlie Rodier, Artificial Intelligence Analysis. On June 6, 1996, in Rolette, Texas, a tragic incident occurred at the Rotier family home. Darlie Routier, her husband Darren, and their 3 young children were attacked. Darlie claimed that an intruder had broken into their house, attacked her and her children, and that she fought back in self-defense. Tragically, 2 of her sons, Damon, 5 years old, and Devin, 6 years old, succumbed to their injuries and passed away. During the investigation, several pieces of evidence were presented that raised suspicion against Darlie. The prosecution argued that Darlie staged the crime scene and inflicted injuries on herself to create the appearance of an intruder. They highlighted inconsistencies in her statements, such as her changing accounts of the events and the absence of signs of forced entry despite her claims. One significant piece of evidence was the presence of bloodstains, both Darlie's and her children's, throughout the house. Additionally, a sock containing her son Damon's blood was discovered in an alley behind the home. Prosecutors argued that the sock was a crucial element in tying Darlie to the crime. Furthermore, the prosecution suggested financial motives for the crime, claiming that Darlie and her husband were facing financial difficulties and that life insurance policies were in place for the children. In 1997, Darlie Routier was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. She has remained on death row since her conviction, and her case has attracted significant attention and debate. Supporters argue that there were inconsistencies and flaws in the investigation and trial, pointing to potential alternate suspects or intruders. The Darlie Routier case remains a complex and controversial one, with ongoing efforts by supporters seeking a reevaluation of the evidence and a reconsideration of her conviction. It continues to generate discussions and debates regarding the accuracy of the trial and the potential involvement of others in the crime. The neck wound. The nature of Darlie Routier's neck wound has been a topic of discussion in the case. Different perspectives have been presented regarding whether the wound was self-inflicted or not. Points for the neck wound being self-inflicted. It's important to recognize that these points reflect arguments made by various parties involved in the case. The determination of whether the neck wound was self-inflicted or inflicted by an external attacker rests on the evaluation of evidence and expert testimony provided during the trial. Points for the neck wound being self-inflicted. 1. Absence of defensive wounds. Critics argue that the lack of defensive wounds on Darlie's arms or hands suggests the possibility of self-infliction, as one would expect such wounds when fighting off an attacker. 2. Alleged inconsistencies in the crime scene. Some argue that certain aspects of the crime scene, such as the absence of forced entry and the neat arrangement of items, raise questions about the presence of an intruder and could support the idea of self-infliction. 3. Access to the murder weapon. Darlie had access to the knife used in the attack as it belonged to her household. This proximity to the weapon raises the possibility that she could have inflicted the neck wound herself. 4. Prior self-inflicted wounds. It has been noted that Darlie had a history of self-inflicted wounds and mental health struggles, which some argue could indicate a propensity for self-harm. 5. Inconsistencies in Darlie's statements. Critics point to alleged inconsistencies in Darlie's accounts of the events surrounding the attack, suggesting that she may have fabricated or altered information to support her defense. Points against the neck wound being self-inflicted. 1. Expert testimony. During the trial, medical experts testified that the location, depth, and characteristics of the neck wound were inconsistent with self-infliction and indicated an external attack. 2. Immediate medical response. Emergency responders and medical professionals who treated Darlie noted the neck wound upon arrival. This suggests that the injury was not self-inflicted, but required immediate medical attention. 3. Absence of hesitation wounds. Critics argue that self-inflicted wounds often exhibit hesitation marks or multiple attempts, whereas the neck wound in Darley's case was described as a single, clean cut, inconsistent with typical self-inflicted injuries. 4. Lack of motive for self-infliction. Supporters argue that Darley had no apparent motive to harm herself, especially considering the severity of the injuries she sustained and the tragic loss of her children. 5. Absence of prior self-harm incidents. While there have been suggestions of prior self-inflicted wounds, there is limited concrete evidence to substantiate a pattern of self-harm or self-infliction in Darley's history. These points highlight the arguments put forth by different perspectives in the case. However, it is important to note that the determination of whether the neck wound was self-inflicted or inflicted by an external attacker ultimately rests on the evaluation of evidence and expert testimony presented during the trial. Analysis of wound being self-inflicted, 45% chance. The sock in the alley. The sock found in the alley behind the Routier residence is an important piece of evidence in the Darley-Routier case. The sock contained the blood of her son, Damon, who was one of the victims of the attack. Its discovery raised questions and became a significant factor in the prosecution's case against Darley. The prosecution argued that the sock was placed there by Darley herself in an attempt to create the appearance of an intruder. They contended that the presence of Damon's blood on the sock indicated Darley's involvement in staging the crime scene. However, supporters of Darley-Routier argue that the sock's location in the alley suggests the possibility of an intruder discarding it while fleeing the scene. They point out that the sock was found several days after the crime, raising concerns about potential contamination and tampering of evidence. The sock's significance is tied to the debate surrounding the staging of the crime scene. The prosecution argued that Darley, in an effort to cast blame on an intruder, placed the sock in the alley to create the impression that an outside attacker was responsible for the crimes. On the other hand, Darley's supporters questioned the prosecution's theory, suggesting alternative explanations for the presence of the sock. Ultimately, the interpretation of the sock's significance rests on the analysis of the evidence and the arguments presented during the trial. The prosecution contends that it supports their case against Darley, while her supporters argue that it raises doubts about her guilt. Points for the sock being placed by Darley. 1. Proximity to the crime scene. Critics argue that the sock's location in the alley behind the Routier residence suggests it could have been easily accessed and placed there by Darley, potentially as part of a staged crime scene. 2. Absence of dirt or debris. Some argue that the sock appeared relatively clean and lacked significant dirt or debris, which they claim is inconsistent with it being discarded and left in an alley. This could suggest it was placed there intentionally. 3. Presence of Damon's blood. The fact that the sock contained Damon's blood raised questions about how it ended up in the alley. Critics argue that this suggests Darley's involvement in moving the sock to the alley to support her claim of an intruder. 4. Timing of the sock's discovery. Critics raise concerns about the fact that the sock was found several days after the crime, potentially allowing for contamination or tampering of the evidence, which they argue could cast doubt on its authenticity. 5. Prosecution's argument. The prosecution contended that the sock was part of Darley's attempt to stage the crime scene and create the appearance of an intruder, pointing to her proximity to the sock, her knowledge of its presence, and the blood evidence as supporting their argument. Points against the sock being placed by Darley. 1. Intruder involvement. Supporters argue that the sock's location in the alley suggests the possibility of an intruder discarding it while fleeing the scene, indicating that it was not placed by Darley. 2. Questions about contamination. Supporters raise concerns about potential contamination or tampering of the evidence, highlighting the delay in the sock's discovery and the subsequent handling, which they argue could cast doubt on its validity as evidence against Darley. 3. Lack of direct evidence. Critics contend that there is no direct evidence linking Darley to the placement of the sock, and its discovery alone is not sufficient to establish her guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. 4. Alternate explanations. Supporters propose alternate explanations for the sock's presence, such as the possibility of an intruder discarding it or it being moved accidentally or unknowingly by other individuals involved in the investigation. 5. Lack of conclusive proof. Critics argue that the sock, while significant, is just one piece of evidence among many in the case. They emphasize that its interpretation should be considered in conjunction with the overall evidence and the context of the crime. Analysis of the probability the sock was placed in the alley by Darley. 20% chance. The silly string video. The silly string video is a piece of evidence in the Darley Routier case that has been subject to scrutiny and interpretation. The video, taken by Darley's husband, Darren, just days after the attack, shows the family celebrating a child's birthday. In the video, Darley can be seen playfully spraying silly string around the living room. Supporters of Darley argue that the video demonstrates her alleged emotional state following the tragedy. They claim that her behavior appears inconsistent with someone who had just lost 2 children and had been through a traumatic event. They argue that it shows her lack of emotional distress, suggesting that she may not have been involved in the crime. On the other hand, critics of Darley highlight that the video does not provide definitive evidence of her guilt or innocence. They contend that people react differently to trauma and grief, and emotional responses can vary widely. They argue that Darley's behavior in the video should not be used as a sole basis for judging her involvement in the crime. Additionally, critics question the timing and relevance of the video. They argue that it captures a moment in time that is distinct from the immediate aftermath of the crime. They highlight the importance of considering the entire context of the case and the events leading up to and following the attack. It's important to note that the interpretation of the silly string video is subjective and open to different perspectives. The video alone does not provide conclusive evidence regarding Darley's guilt or innocence. The legal process and the overall body of evidence presented during the trial should be taken into account when forming an understanding of the case. Suspicious cars in the neighborhood. The presence of suspicious cars in the neighborhood is an important aspect of the Darley Routier case. Several neighbors reported observing unfamiliar or suspicious vehicles in the vicinity around the time of the crime. These reports raised questions about the potential involvement of unknown individuals in the events that unfolded. According to witness accounts, neighbors noticed vehicles parked or driving in the area, which they considered out of the ordinary or suspicious. Some witnesses mentioned seeing a dark-colored or maroon vehicle parked on the street or in the vicinity of the Routier residence. Others reported seeing a green or teal vehicle driving at high speeds in the neighborhood. These reports of suspicious cars led to speculations that an unknown intruder or intruders could have been involved in the crime. Supporters of Darley Routier argue that the presence of these vehicles supports her claims of an intruder being responsible for the attack on her and her children. However, critics argue that these reports of suspicious cars may not necessarily be linked to the crime itself. They contend that the presence of unfamiliar vehicles could be coincidental or unrelated to the events that occurred at the Routier residence. They suggest that the focus should be on other aspects of the case, such as the physical evidence and the circumstances surrounding the crime scene. It is important to note that while witness accounts of suspicious vehicles add another layer of complexity to the case, their significance and connection to the crime remain subject to interpretation. The investigation and legal proceedings would require a thorough examination of these witness testimonies, including cross-referencing them with other evidence and considering any potential leads they might provide. Analysis of the probability one of these vehicles could be connected to the crime, 40%. Alternate theories. In the Darlie Routier case, while Darlie herself was the primary suspect and subsequently convicted, there have been alternative theories and suggestions put forth by various parties. Here are 10 individuals who have been mentioned as potential alternate suspects, but please note that these are speculative and have not been substantiated through official investigations or legal processes. 1. Unknown intruder. One theory suggests the involvement of an unknown intruder or intruders who entered the Routier residence on the night of the crime. Points for 1. Presence of unknown fingerprints or DNA evidence at the crime scene that does not match any known individuals in the household. 2. Reports of suspicious individuals or vehicles in the neighborhood around the time of the crime. 3. Lack of clear motive for Darlie to stage the crime and harm her own children. 4. Possibility that an intruder could have gained access to the residence without detection. 5. Uncertain origin of the knife used in the attack, potentially suggesting involvement of an unknown assailant. Points against. 1. Absence of signs of forced entry or evidence of an intruder in the home. 2. Darlie's inconsistent statements and actions following the crime. 3. Lack of concrete evidence directly implicating an unknown intruder. 4. Proximity of the victims to Darlie during the attack, raising questions about the ability of an intruder to carry out the crime without confrontation. 5. Failure to identify or apprehend any potential suspects fitting the description of an intruder. 2. Darlie's estranged husband, Darren Routier. Some have speculated about the potential involvement of Darlie's estranged husband, Darren, citing factors such as financial motives and inconsistencies in his statements. Points for 1. Potential financial motives, including life insurance policies and financial strain within the family. 2. Inconsistencies in Darren's statements and actions. 3. Access to the residence and familiarity with the family's routine. 4. Possible involvement in staging the crime scene to divert suspicion. 5. Darren's presence at the crime scene during the attack raises questions about his potential involvement. Points against. 1. Lack of concrete evidence directly implicating Darren in the crime. 2. Alibi and testimony of Darren's whereabouts during the attack. 3. No prior history of violence or criminal behavior. 4. Absence of financial gain following the crime. 5. Darlie's consistent claims of Darren's innocence and lack of involvement. 3. Intruders targeting the wrong house. It has been proposed that the attack may have been a case of mistaken identity, with intruders targeting the wrong residence. Points for intruders targeting the wrong house. 1. Lack of a clear motive. If the crime was a case of mistaken identity, intruders may have targeted the wrong house due to similarities or confusion, resulting in the attack on Darlie and her family. 2. Reports of unfamiliar vehicles or suspicious individuals in the neighborhood. Witness accounts of unknown cars or individuals present in the area may support the theory that intruders mistakenly believed they were targeting a different residence. 3. Absence of personal connections or conflicts with Darlie or her family. If the victims were not specifically targeted, it suggests that the attackers had no personal motive for harming them. 4. Randomness of the attack. If the perpetrators had intended to target someone else, the seemingly random nature of the crime may align with the theory of intruders targeting the wrong house. 5. Errors or inconsistencies in the crime planning or execution. Mistakes made during the crime, such as selecting the wrong residence or misidentifying the victims, could suggest that intruders mistakenly targeted Darley's home. Points against intruders targeting the wrong house. 1. Proximity to the crime scene. The attackers would have needed to approach the correct house, which raises questions about how they could have mistaken the target if Darley's residence was their intended destination. 2. Complexity of the attack. The severity and extent of the violence inflicted on Darley and her children suggest a planned and deliberate act, making it less likely that intruders simply targeted the wrong house by chance. 3. Knowledge of the victims. The assailants appeared to have information about the family's routines and vulnerabilities, indicating some level of familiarity with their target. 4. Lack of evidence or leads pointing to a mistaken target. No concrete evidence, such as statements from the attackers themselves or other corroborating sources, supports the theory of intruders mistakenly targeting the wrong house. 5. Focus on Darley as the primary suspect. The investigation and legal proceedings primarily centered around Darley's involvement, with her consistent claim of an unknown intruder being questioned by authorities. 4. A hired hitman. This theory suggests that someone hired a hitman to carry out the attack, possibly motivated by personal or financial reasons. Points 4. 1. Possibility of someone with a motive to harm Darley or her family hiring a hitman to carry out the attack. 2. Financial motives or disputes that could prompt someone to seek out a hitman's services. 3. Lack of personal connection between the hitman and the victims, making it challenging to establish a clear motive. 4. Complexities and severity of the attack potentially indicating a professional or planned hit. 5. Potential involvement of multiple individuals in coordinating the crime, including the hiring of a hitman. Points against. 1. Absence of concrete evidence linking the crime to a hired hitman. 2. Lack of a clear motive or evidence of financial gain following the crime. 3. Focus on Darley as the primary suspect and her own account of an intruder. 4. No indications of a professional hit or a known hitman being involved. 5. The complexity of orchestrating a hired hit and keeping it concealed without any substantial evidence or leads pointing in that direction. 5. Darley's former acquaintances. Some have speculated about the involvement of individuals from Darley's past who may have held grudges or harbored ill intentions towards her. Points for 1. Potential motives stemming from past conflicts, disputes, or strained relationships. 2. Knowledge of Darley's vulnerabilities and personal history that could be exploited. 3. Possible access to personal information or familiarity with the family's routine. 4. Lack of personal connection between the suspects and the victims, making it difficult to establish a clear motive. 5. Potential involvement of multiple individuals collaborating to carry out the crime. Points against. 1. Absence of concrete evidence directly implicating Darley's former acquaintances in the crime. 2. No known disputes or conflicts that would specifically link these individuals to the attack. 3. Focus on Darley as the primary suspect and her consistent claim of an intruder. 4. Lack of substantial leads or evidence pointing to the involvement of specific former acquaintances. 5. The complexity of orchestrating such a crime and keeping it concealed without any substantial evidence or leads pointing in that direction. 6. Serial killer or transient. This theory suggests the possibility of a random encounter with a transient or serial killer who happened to be in the area. Points for 1. Similar unsolved cases or patterns of attacks in the area that could indicate the presence of a serial killer or transient. 2. Possibility of a random encounter with an individual passing through the area. 3. MO. Modus operandi, similarities to other unsolved crimes, suggesting the involvement of a serial offender. 4. Lack of personal connection or motive between the suspect and Darlie or her family. 5. Difficulty in identifying transient individuals, making it challenging to establish their presence or involvement definitively. Points against. 1. Lack of a clear pattern or connection to other known serial killer cases in the area. 2. No evidence linking the crime to other unsolved cases or indicating the involvement of a transient. 3. Focus on the immediate vicinity and absence of reports of similar attacks in neighboring areas. 4. Presence of personal items and valuables left untouched, potentially inconsistent with the behavior of a transient or serial killer. 5. Darlie's consistent claim of an intruder which conflicts with the profile of a serial killer targeting specific victims. 7. A neighbor or someone familiar with the area. Some propose that the perpetrator could have been someone familiar with the neighborhood or a neighbor who had knowledge of the family's routine. Points 4. 1. Knowledge of the family's routine and vulnerabilities due to proximity and familiarity with the neighborhood. 2. Ease of access to the residence and potential opportunity to observe the family's habits. 3. Potential motive stemming from personal disputes or conflicts. 4. Witnesses reporting unfamiliar or suspicious vehicles or individuals in the vicinity at the time of the crime. 5. Possibility of the suspect blending in with the local community, making identification and apprehension challenging. Points against. 1. Lack of concrete evidence directly linking a neighbor or someone familiar with the area to the crime. 2. No prior history of conflicts or disputes between the Rodier family and their neighbors. 3. Absence of reports or evidence indicating a neighbor's involvement. 4. Darlie's consistent claims of an unknown intruder rather than a familiar face from the neighborhood. 5. Failure to identify or apprehend any specific neighbors or individuals fitting the description of a potential suspect. 8. Another family member. There have been suggestions that another family member, such as a relative or a close associate, could have been involved. Points 4. 1. Access to the residence and familiarity with the family's routines, making it easier to carry out the crime. 2. Potential motives stemming from personal conflicts, disputes, or strained relationships within the family. 3. Possibility of involvement in staging crime scene or manipulating the evidence. 4. Knowledge of personal vulnerabilities and family dynamics that could be exploited. 5. Potential involvement of multiple individuals collaborating to carry out the crime. Points against. 1. Lack of concrete evidence directly implicating another family member in the crime. 2. No prior history or documented incidents indicating violent tendencies or criminal behavior within the family. 3. Focus on Darlie as the primary suspect and her consistent claim of an unknown intruder. 4. No clear motive or history of significant conflicts or disputes within the family that would specifically point to the involvement of another family member. 5. The complexity of orchestrating such a crime and keeping it concealed without any substantial evidence or leads pointing in that direction. 9. Stalker or obsessed individual. This theory suggests the possibility of a stalker or someone with an unhealthy fixation on Darlie or the family. Points 4. 1. Possibility of a stalker or someone with an unhealthy fixation on Darlie or her family. 2. History of unwanted attention or harassment from an individual known to Darlie or the family. 3. Potential motive driven by obsession, jealousy, or resentment. 4. Knowledge of personal details, routines, and vulnerabilities that could be exploited in the crime. 5. Possibility of a pattern of stalking behavior or previous incidents indicating an individual's fixation on Darlie. Points against. 1. Lack of concrete evidence linking the crime to a specific stalker or obsessed individual. 2. Absence of documented incidents or reports of harassment or stalking directed towards Darlie or the family. 3. Focus on Darlie as the primary suspect and her consistent claim of an unknown intruder. 4. No clear motive or history of personal animosity with an individual that would point to a stalker or obsessed individual's involvement. 5. The complexity of orchestrating such a crime and keeping it concealed without any substantial evidence or leads pointing in that direction. 10. Mistaken revenge or revenge gone wrong. Some propose that the crime may have been an act of revenge intended for someone else, but due to mistaken identity or a botched plan, Darlie and her children became unintended victims. Points 4. 1. Possibility of mistaken identity if the perpetrator intended to target someone else in the neighborhood. 2. Motives for revenge against someone associated with the neighborhood or community. 3. Presence of conflicting or unsettled disputes within the neighborhood that could lead to mistaken revenge. 4. Reports of suspicious vehicles or unfamiliar individuals in the vicinity suggesting a potential connection to a mistaken target. 5. Difficulty in identifying the intended target if the crime was a result of mistaken revenge. Points against. 1. Lack of concrete evidence or leads supporting the theory of mistaken revenge. 2. No specific conflicts or disputes involving the Rotier family that would point to being targeted for revenge. 3. Absence of any known enemies or individuals with a motive for revenge against the family. 4. The nature and severity of the attack on Darlie and her children suggesting a more personal motive rather than a case of mistaken revenge. 5. Darlie's consistent claims of an intruder rather than a case of mistaken identity or revenge. Analysis of probability for each of these theories. Unknown intruder, 30%. Darren Routier, Darlie's estranged husband, 20%. Serial killer or transient, 15%. A hired hitman, 10%. Darlie's former acquaintances, 10%. Neighbor or someone familiar with the area, 10%. Mistaken revenge or revenge gone wrong, 10%. Stalker or obsessed individual, 10%. Another family member, 5%. Intruders targeting the wrong house, 10%. Darren Routier. There have been speculations and discussions regarding Darren's potential knowledge or involvement in the case. Supporters of Darlie may argue that Darren has knowledge of what happened and potentially played a role in the crime. However, critics may argue that there is no concrete evidence directly implicating Darren in the crime and that he maintains his innocence. Analysis of probability. Regardless of extent of involvement, that Darren Routier knows what happened, 40%.